Picture a wardrobe. Not the wardrobe you have at home with your ordinary things folded inside it. Picture a wardrobe that is a room 10 feet wide and 14 feet deep, its walls lined floor to ceiling with garments so expensive that touching one without permission is a dismissible offence. Silks that shift between green and gold depending on which way the candlelight hits them. Brocades so heavy with silver thread they feel like something between cloth and armour. Velvet so dense you could press your hand into the surface and feel it hold you back. Now add the smell. Not the smell you're imagining. Not rose water. Not clean linen. Not the pleasant, cool cedar and lavender smell of a well-kept wardrobe in a house where things are cared for. The smell of months of skin, of sweat worked so deep into silk that no amount of airing will lift it. The particular intimacy of a garment that has been worn against a human body in a heated room for hours and then returned to a shelf and powdered over and stored and never, not once, submerged in water. The smell of oil from fingers, from hair, from the scalp, transferred over hundreds of dressings and undressings to every bodice, every collar, every gathered cuff, that has settled into the weave the way ink settles into paper. The smell of face powder layered over everything else, chalk and orris root and white lead pressed into every surface like a coat of paint over a wall that has something to hide, and underneath the powder, refusing to be covered, insisting on making itself known to anyone who comes close enough. Something animal, something human. The smell of a body that has been in this cloth and left something of itself behind. Add to that the smell of the garderobe 3 doors down, where all necessary human business is conducted, and whose proximity to the wardrobe is, let us say, an architectural decision no one has ever spoken aloud about, because some things in this house are not spoken about. Add the smell of chamber pots that are emptied on a schedule that does not always match the frequency at which they are used. Add the lavender sachets tucked into every drawer and every shelf, doing their sincere and inadequate best. That's the wardrobe. That's where you're going to spend the next year of your life. Welcome to Paris in the autumn of 1699, and welcome to the most intimate education in what aristocratic elegance actually looks like from the inside. I make these history episodes, and honestly, I don't know if you're listening to sleep or if you're lying awake right now reconsidering every expensive piece of clothing you own. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open in the dark. For half a second, less maybe, you don't know where you are. The ceiling is the wrong height, too high, too far away in the darkness, like a ceiling that belongs to a different life. The sounds are wrong, not the sounds of your mother's house in Rouen, not the roosters and the scrape of an iron pot in the kitchen below, and your sister turning over in the bed beside you, not any sound that says home. These sounds say Paris. They say 4 a.m. in a city of 500,000 people, none of whom have decided to stop yet. Somewhere below the window in the cobbled courtyard, a horse stamps once, twice, and goes quiet. Something glass breaks on a distant street, not close enough to be alarming, not far enough to be ignorable, exactly in that middle distance that makes you wonder. A man shouts something in an accent so thickly Parisian you catch maybe one word in 4. Then laughter, then nothing, then the city resuming its permanent low roar, the sound of that many people breathing in the same place, the sound that never fully stops, then the smells. This is the first thing you understood, arriving here 3 weeks ago. The smells of the Hôtel de Villeneuve come in layers, and you're learning to read them the way you might learn to read weather. Each one tells you something. Each one is information if you know what you're smelling. The bottom layer is stone. Old stone, 80 years of it. The walls of a mansion built when the Marais was fashionable, when the nobility clustered here in their private hotels behind high walls and iron gates. Stone absorbs everything. 80 years of fires in a dozen fireplaces, 80 years of cooking smells rising from the kitchen, 80 years of people living and being sick and recovering and dying and living again in these rooms. You can't smell the stone directly anymore. It's too deep, too mixed with everything on top of it. But it's there under everything else, the ground note, the base. Over the stone comes the beeswax. Oak floors polished daily to a dark mirror shine. The smell of beeswax is almost pleasant. Something warm and amber. Something that belongs in a church. And you've already started to associate it with the sound of early morning and the particular feeling of muscles that aren't warm yet. The floors creak in the cold. They expand and contract with the temperature settling into the night, and for your first 10 days here you woke up at every creak, convinced it was Madame du Plessis standing outside your door in the dark watching to see if you'd overslept. It was always just the house, then the human smell. 14 family members and guests on the upper floors, 35 to 40 when there are visitors, 30 servants of various ranks in various rooms and closets and attic slots. Your room is a cupboard on the upper floor, not a figure of speech. Actually a cupboard, the shelves taken out, a cot installed, a hook for your dress, a window the size of a prayer book that looks onto a well shaft. The well shaft smells of algae and old rope. When you open the window for air, you exchange one bad air for a different one. And then, cutting through everything else, rising through the floorboards and the shut doors and the closed passages like smoke that has found all the gaps, the wardrobe. The smell of the wardrobe reaches you up here. You lie on your back in the dark, aware of it, and you think, this is the job. This is what you came to Paris for. Your name is Marguerite Bonnard. You're 16 years old. You've been the second lady's maid to the Comtesse de Villeneuve for 23 days. You came from Rouen with a letter of introduction from the wife of your father's employer, and the letter described you as industrious, discreet, and skilled with a needle. All three things are true. The letter did not describe you as prepared for what you found, because the woman who wrote it, a kind woman, a provincial woman, a woman who had never been closer to the French court than a description read aloud from a gazette, had no way of knowing what prepared would look like. You get up. The floor is cold. Not unpleasantly cold, not yet. Come December, Madame du Plessis has told you without particular sympathy, the floor in this room will be cold enough to take the feeling out of your feet before you reach the door. You splash water on your face from the basin. The water has a faint greyness to it from the lead in the pipes. You've stopped thinking about this. You dress quickly, plain wool dress in dark grey, linen cap, white apron, everything washable. This is the great private irony of your position, the one you haven't said out loud yet but feel press against you every morning. The more important a person is in this house, the less washable their clothing is. Your dress can be boiled. The Comtesse's silk mantua cannot be washed at all, not once, not ever. You go to the laundry. The silk goes nowhere near it. Down the servants' stair, through the passage, through the heavy door with the brass shell handle into the wardrobe room. Madame du Plessis is already there. Of course she is. She's a narrow woman with dark hair pulled back so tightly it alters the shape of her face, and she has the posture of someone who decided long ago that the world would simply have to accept her standards. She's standing at the central table, the long table that takes up most of the room, used for laying out garments, with a candelabra in one hand and a length of pale blue silk in the other. She holds the silk up toward the candles. The silver thread in the weave catches the light, and briefly the fabric looks like something that belongs in a church, draped over an altar, untouched by ordinary hands. She does not look up when you come in. "You're on time," she says. This is the closest she comes to good morning. Madame du Plessis. You come to stand at the other side of the table. She holds the fabric out toward you. "Come here. Tell me what you see." You lean in. The silk is pale blue, almost the colour of a winter sky at noon, with silver thread running through it in a pattern of tiny repeating vines. Even by candlelight, even at 5 in the morning, the fabric is something. The kind of cloth that makes your hands understand immediately without being told why silk costs what it costs. The threads are so fine and so evenly distributed that the surface looks almost liquid, like light on still water. But there is something else. At the seam where the bodice attaches to the skirt, where the two pieces of fabric have been pressed together under a boning channel, where the stays beneath push constantly against the lining, there is a darkening in the weave. Not dramatic, not visible from across a room, but here, under the candles, unmistakable. Perspiration, you say. Very good. Her voice carries no inflection that tells you whether this is impressive or only adequate. This gown was last worn in March, at the Duchesse de Guéménér's wedding reception. The Comtesse danced for 4 hours. Then the gown was returned to this room, powdered and stored. Powdered, as everything is. She sets the fabric down on the table with the careful economy of someone who has been doing this work for 20 years and understands the weight of what she handles. The perspiration mark was here in March. I noted it. I thought the powder and the cedar might address it over the summer. A pause. They did not. You look at the mark. The darkening in the weave, patient and permanent, settling into the silver thread like a shadow that has decided to stay. The Comtesse wants to wear this on Wednesday, you say. Not a question. You already know. To the Daumont reception. Yes. Madame du Plessis moved around the table to the hem of the gown. Come look at this. You follow the skirt down to the hem. The lace. You stop. The lace is, it was once, extraordinary. Pont-de-France, French needlepoint lace, the most expensive lace produced anywhere in the world, made by women who spend their entire working lives in dedicated workshops, learning to construct it by hand, thread by thread, using techniques that take years to master. A strip of it 4 inches wide running the full circumference of the skirt. You haven't yet learned to calculate exactly how much that cost per metre. But Madame du Plessis mentioned once, in a tone of voice that was neither boastful nor apologetic, that the lace on the Comtesse's court presentation gown had cost more than a year's wages for a skilled servant. The lace on this gown has been walked on, not carelessly, not because anyone is careless with things worth this much. But this is a formal gown with a train, and trains drag, and floors in Paris in 1699 are floors, stone, polished wood, the accumulated record of every shoe that has crossed them, every candle that has dripped, every guest who has eaten something and then walked away. The lace at the hem has collected all of this, slowly over 6 wearings, month by month, dancing hour by dancing hour. It has a darkness at the very edge that speaks of many rooms. The lace, you say. We will detach it, wash it, and reset it. You know how to work with Pointe de France. You've never touched Pointe de France in your life. You've worked with Valenciennes and Mechli and the plain white lace your mother wore to church on Sundays, which cost a small fraction of what this costs per centimetre. I'm learning, you say. Madame du Plessis holds your gaze for a moment. There is something in her face that might be assessment, or might be the beginning of something harder to name. Sit down, she says. Watch. Don't touch anything until I tell you to, and pay attention, because I will not show you twice. You sit. She picks up a small pair of scissors, the kind that look delicate until you understand that the delicacy is precision, that tools made for this work must be as controlled as a surgeon's, and she begins to detach the lace from the hem. Her hands move without hurry, without hesitation. Each stitch is severed with a cut so small and exact it almost isn't there. The lace comes free from the silk without pulling, without tearing, without leaving even a thread out of place. The gown itself, she says, working as she talks, has not been washed. It cannot be washed. If you put this fabric in water, the dye bleeds, the silk puckers, the silver thread tarnishes. You would ruin a gown worth more than your father's house. Your father's house is a decent house. You say nothing. So how does it get clean, you ask? It doesn't. Not the way you mean. She lifts a section of freed lace, examines it against the candlelight, sets it in a careful pile to her left. You freshen it. You air it in shade, not sunlight, because sunlight bleaches. You brush the surface with a very soft brush to remove what's sitting on top of the weave. You use stale bread to lift certain marks from the fabric. You use powder to absorb oil. And the perspiration marks, sometimes you can lift them with spirits of wine, diluted carefully, applied with a cloth no coarser than the finest muslin, applied in the direction of the weave, never rubbed. She pauses. Sometimes you cannot lift them at all. In those cases you alter the garment to hide the mark, or you replace the panel, or, another pause, brief and precise, you advise the Comtesse to choose a different gown. You tell her it can't be worn. You advise her. She decides. There is a difference, and you will learn it. You're quiet, watching her hands work. The lace accumulates beside the scissors, metre by careful metre. How many times does a formal gown get worn, you ask, before the damage becomes permanent? Madame du Plessis considers this with the seriousness the question deserves. A formal gown might be worn 6 times in a season, 8 times for a less visible woman. Some women wear the same gown 15 times before the condition becomes noticeable to an observer. She glances up. The Comtesse is not a less visible woman. 6 times, at 4 hours each, 24 hours. 24 hours in heated rooms, dancing, eating, being pressed against other people in equally heated garments. She returns to the lace. The perspiration mark appears after 2 wearings generally. By the 6th wearing it is what you see before you. You sit with that. The arithmetic of it is actually specific, and it leads somewhere uncomfortable. 24 hours of proximity to a human body, compressed into the places that take the most contact. The armpits, the bodice back, the collar, the cuffs, the hem, where the floor's accumulated record embeds itself into lace that costs more per metre than a horse. And between those 24 hours, the wardrobe, the cedar, the powder, the sachets, the careful airing that cannot be done in sunlight and can only be done when the weather permits, and must be supervised because fabric left unsupervised outdoors becomes someone's problem. And none of it, you say, actually cleans the gown. None of it removes what the body has deposited in the weave. She finishes the last section of lace and sets the scissors down. It manages the surface. It buys time. It allows the gown to be worn again before the damage becomes visible to the person who is not holding the candle close. She looks at you across the table. Your job, she says, is to make sure the damage is never visible to the person who is not holding the candle close. That is the job. That is the whole of it. Do you understand? You understand. You're not sure yet what understanding it fully cost you, but you understand. Begin the bodice, she says. The brush is to your left. You're looking for everything that isn't silk. You pick up the brush. It is the softest brush you have ever held. The bristles are white and so fine you can barely feel them against your fingertip. You press it gently against the surface of the bodice and begin. The first stroke lifts powder. White and fine, it comes off the silk in a small cloud and settles on the dark cloth Madame Duplessis has laid under the gown for exactly this purpose. The second stroke lifts more powder. The third lifts powder and something darker, something that isn't chalk, a greyish accumulation from the weave of the fabric itself. The fourth stroke begins to lift something else, something waxy, something that smells faintly when it comes free of the fabric, like the sachets of dried flowers that have been sitting in this room all summer. But under the flower smell, something older, something that has been in this weave since March. You keep brushing. Outside, Paris begins its morning. The gate to the courtyard opens at 6 for deliveries. The kitchen fires have been burning since 4. The smell of wood smoke drifts up through the floors, mixing with everything the city produces at this hour, which is a great deal because Paris at 5:30 in the morning is already working, already moving, already generating the noise and smell of 400,000 people who have never in their lives had the luxury of sleeping late. This is Paris in 1699. You've been here 23 days. You still can't hold it in your head all at once. The scale of it. Somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 people. And the reason nobody knows the exact number is itself part of the story, because this is a city that has outgrown any mechanism for counting itself, that has been growing faster than anyone planned for, that has filled every alley and court and garret with people who came from the provinces, with letters of introduction and bundled clothes, and the conviction that this was the place where things happened. You were one of them 3 weeks ago. In some ways you still are, though you're learning to hide it. The smell of that many people, in a city with drainage designed for a third of this population, in streets that serve as open sewers for whatever no one wants to carry further, in a river that accepts everything the city produces and carries it away, mostly. The smell is geological in its layers and its permanence. In October, the cold mutes it. Come July, you've been told, the smell of Paris is an event in itself. The Seine running slow and warm, the gutters baking, the contents of 500,000 chamber pots emptied into the street every morning, swilled toward the nearest drain by the nearest bucket of water, by whoever is responsible for the section of pavement in front of their door. The noblewoman's gown lives in this city. The gown just doesn't mention it. By 6 o'clock you've worked through the bodice front, and Madame Duplessis has moved to the secondary wardrobe room, the locked room, the one you didn't see until your second week, and come back with the petticoat that pairs with the gown. She sets it on the table beside you. You look at it. The petticoat is white, or it was originally. The silk has gone ivory with age and use, and at the hem, the innermost hem, the one that sees the floor at every wearing, there is a band of darker coloration running the full circumference. Not as severe as the gown's hem because the petticoat is hidden, never dragged across ballroom floors in the same way, but there. At the waist, where the drawstring ties and is untied and retied by maids' hands at every dressing and undressing, the fabric has a greyness that speaks of accumulated contact, of daily handling, of the transfer of 100 fingers' oils over many months. This one can be laundered, Madame du Plessis says, carefully. Cool water, mild soap, do not wring, do not hang in sunlight. You take it to the laundry room yourself. You explain to Mireille, the older laundress, not the girl, you explain precisely how it must be handled. You watch the beginning of the process. You don't leave until you know she's understood. And the gown itself doesn't go to the laundry room. The gown does not go to the laundry room. She says it the way you say the sun rises in the east. A fact of the world. Never. She moves to stand beside you at the table. She leans in over the bodice, close, examining the perspiration mark from different angles. Her nose is nearly touching the fabric. She's reading it the way a doctor reads a wound, gathering information about age and depth and what it will take. We try spirits of wine first, she says. If it lifts, good. If not, we discuss options with the Comtesse. She has other gowns. How many other gowns? Madame du Plessis straightens. Come. She leads you through the connecting door into the secondary wardrobe room. You've been in here twice, both times with Madame du Plessis right beside you, taking inventory, pointing things out. But you haven't been left in it alone. You haven't had time to simply look. The room is smaller than the main wardrobe room, but its shelves run floor to ceiling on 3 walls, and on every shelf, wrapped in unbleached linen and tied with ribbons coded by a system that lives entirely in Madame du Plessis' head, are the garments. Count the shelves, she says. You count. 6 shelves per wall, 3 walls of shelves, 18 shelves. Each shelf holds between 2 and 5 wrapped parcels. There are 72 garments in this room, Madame du Plessis says. Formal gowns, mantuas, robe de chambre, court dress, riding habit. This is not counting petticoats, not counting linen, not counting accessories. 72 outer garments for one woman. You stand in the middle of the room, turning slowly. 72. The newest arrived in August, she continues, as though this is normal, because for her it is, because this has been her world for 20 years. The oldest. She moves to the far left of the bottom shelf and touches a parcel, wrapped more carefully than the others, with an extra layer of linen and a ribbon that has been tied and retied so many times, the bow has a particular practised shape. The oldest is the gown the Comtesse wore to her court presentation. She was 18. She's 31 now. That's 13 years. The gown has been aired every year, powdered, inspected. It is in condition. A pause, very brief. I know what it smells like. You understand, standing there in the candlelight with rows of wrapped silk around you, what she is telling you. Not just about the court gown, about the whole room, about the system these rooms represent. The extraordinary arrangement by which the richest women in France wear garments that a laundress would refuse to put her hands near, and the laundress never knows, and the guests at the ball never know, because the laundress doesn't come here and the guests don't get close enough, and everyone, the Comtesse, the guests, the court, the city, is maintaining the same careful collective fiction. The fiction that says, the woman in the silk is clean. The woman in the silk is above the body's ordinary facts. The woman in the silk is refinement made material, elegance visible, the distance between the aristocracy and the gutter made into cloth and worn on the body. And you are the person who knows it isn't true. You're going to spend your days knowing what no one in the drawing room is allowed to acknowledge. Go wake the Comtesse, Madame du Plessis says. She rises at 7. You know the routine. You know the routine. You leave the wardrobe rooms and walk the upper corridor to the door of the bedchamber. Before you knock, you take a moment outside the door. This is something Madame du Plessis taught you in your first week. One of the dozen things she taught you that aren't in any description of the job, and that you would have taken months to learn on your own. She said, before you enter, settle yourself. Because your function in the morning hours is to be a surface that reflects what the Comtesse needs. Calm, capable, present without being present. If you're flustered, if something from the wardrobe rooms is still sitting on your face, if you bring your own morning into her room, it will cost time, and time in the morning is costly in a way that time later in the day is not. You are not there. Your hands are there. Your eyes are there. The work is being done by something that has no particular feelings about the cold floor, or the smell of the wardrobe, or the 6 days ahead of making a silk gown presentable, by means that stop well short of washing it. The work is being done, and it is quiet, and it is good. You knock once softly, enter on a sound from inside. The bedchamber is warm. The fireplace was built up at 4 by the lower maid, and the room has had 3 hours to absorb the heat. So the air here is the warmest you've been in since leaving your blanket. 3 windows face the courtyard, their curtains drawn, the heavy silk damask blocking the sound of the street deliveries that are beginning below. The bed hangs with gold and cream damask changed with the seasons, and in the bed the curtains on one side have been drawn back, because the Comtesse is already awake. She usually is. She's a light sleeper. Her mind doesn't release her easily at night, and it doesn't hold her long in the morning, and the result is that she's often awake before you come, but stays in bed, because the room is cold, and the blankets are warm, and getting out of bed requires the complex mobilization of the wardrobe, and the wardrobe requires you. This morning she's sitting against her pillows with her hair loose around her shoulders, her nightcap set aside, her hands folded in her lap. Her expression, when you enter, is the one you're starting to learn to read. The morning expression, the not yet face. The face that exists before the day's architecture goes on. She looks this morning like a woman who is 31 years old. She has fine lines at the corners of her eyes, and a slight tiredness under them that speaks of the card party at the Vicomtesse de Castries the night before, which ran to 2 in the morning because someone with money to lose has infinite patience for cards, and the Comtesse, you've gathered, is not always among those with money to lose. She looks like a woman who lives in a body that gets tired and produces the evidence of being tired, and breathes and eats and does all the ordinary things that bodies do. By 10 o'clock she will not look tired. By 10 o'clock she will be the Comtesse de Villeneuve, precisely arranged, powdered to an even ivory pallor, her hair built into the current fashion with its careful height, a silk patch shaped like a crescent moon at the corner of her left eye that draws attention to the eye and away from the line beside it. She will be wearing a mantua in burgundy silk with cream lace at the elbows, a pair of shoes whose heels add 2 inches to her height, gloves that button at the wrist, and an expression of composed attention that can survive 4 hours of conversation with people she finds, you suspect, mostly tedious. This transformation will take 3 hours. It will involve roughly 40 discrete steps, and it begins right now with the first layer. The chemise is warming beside the fire on a low stand. You learned in your first week to warm the first linen before bringing it to the Comtesse, because cold linen against skin makes her flinch, and a flinching start to the morning creates a certain quality of tension that distributes itself through the remaining 3 hours in ways that are difficult to correct. The chemise is linen, plain, white, laundered yesterday, still carrying the faint clean smell of the soap the laundress uses. You bring it. You help her out of the night chemise. That one goes directly to the laundry every morning without exception, the one clean-washed element of every single day. And for a moment in the firelight, the Comtesse de Villeneuve stands in no chemise at all. This is the body that all those garments are built to present, a body like any other body. Shoulders with a slight forward curve from years of the stay's correction. Pale skin that has not seen direct sunlight anywhere below the collarbone since she was a child. The marks of the previous day's stay is still faintly visible on her ribs and back, not bruises, more like shadows, the places where the boning has made its long and patient argument against the flesh. A body that is warm and produces warmth, that has oil in its skin and salt in its sweat, and all the ordinary biological facts of being alive, the same facts as the fishwife in the market stalls 3 streets away. The distance between the Comtesse de Villeneuve and the woman selling salted cod in the Marais market, at this particular hour, in this particular light, is smaller than any gown in the secondary wardrobe room would have you believe. This is the knowledge you carry, the knowledge that makes your work necessary and, in a way you're only beginning to feel the edges of, peculiar to inhabit. You know what's underneath. You know the full inventory of what it cost to produce the surface. And you know, therefore, with a precision that no guest at any reception will ever have, that the surface is constructed, that it is maintained, that it requires 6 people and several hundred leaves worth of silk and lace and powder and sachets and diluted spirits of wine and the particular soft brush that lives on the left side of the work table in the wardrobe room. Whether this knowledge makes the Comtesse more real or less real, that's a question you're still working out. "Good morning, Marguerite," she says, into the chemise as it goes over her head. "Good morning, Madame la Comtesse." The blue gown. Duplessis has looked at it. "We were in the wardrobe room at 5, Madame. Madame Duplessis has begun separating the lace from the hem." The Comtesse's expression doesn't shift, not visibly. But you've been watching her face for 23 days with the specific attention of someone whose job depends on reading it correctly, and you see the very small contraction at the corner of her mouth that means she heard what begun separating the lace actually means. Is it wearable? Madame Duplessis believes it will be, with the proper attention. Then we'll see that it has it. She extends her right foot. Stockings. You kneel and begin rolling the first silk stocking up her calf, over the knee, securing the garter with the exact tension you've learned is correct, not tight enough to mark, not loose enough to slip. Grey ribbons on Wednesday, not blue. I want the jet. Yes, madame. You note it. Grey ribbons, jet jewellery, blue gown, repaired lace, matching shoes. You need to check the shoes. That's a task for this morning after the dressing. Before the lace goes to the laundry, you need to check the blue satin shoes, and if there's anything to address on those, it goes into the same 6-day schedule that's already filling up in your head. Second stocking, second garter. Now the stays. The stays are the architectural fact around which everything else is organised. Without them, the bodice doesn't close, the skirt doesn't sit right, The whole expensive system collapses into cloth lying on a table. The Comtesse's stays are made of stiffened linen boned with baleen. Actual whale. The long flexible plates from the jaw of an animal that died in waters north of Iceland, reduced by the whaler's industry to the precise flat strips that run vertically through the channel stitched into this garment and laced at the back with silk cord. They determine the line: long torso, compressed waist, elevated and forward bosom, a flat and upright back that reads, from across the room, as a kind of natural dignity, as though the Comtesse de Villeneuve was simply born holding herself this way. She was not born holding herself this way. You know this because you are the one who creates it every morning, and the creating involves a specific technique and a specific amount of force, and about 4 minutes of careful adjusting. You take the lacing cord. You begin. The stays go on over the chemise. The linen of the chemise will bear the mark of the stays by evening, the pressure lines in the fabric, the slight dampness at the places that work hardest. Tomorrow the chemise goes to the laundry. A fresh one comes back white and clean, laundered by hands that will never know what the stays above them look like. The stays themselves, pressing against the Comtesse's torso right now, shaping the flesh into the correct aristocratic geometry, have been in use for 3 years. 3 years of mornings exactly like this one. They've been aired, powdered, treated once with diluted vinegar for a specific problem that is not discussed, but they've never been put in water. They've never been fully cleaned. They know 3 years of her. They have shaped themselves to her body over 3 years, the whalebone finding its accommodation with her specific ribs, the linen wearing smooth at the places of most contact and stiffening slightly at others, and in the places where the wear shows Madame Duplessis has made repairs that are visible only from very close, and you are paid to be very close, and so you see them. Pas trop, the Comtesse says quietly, not too tight. Of course, madame. Before you go any further with the mourning, because after the stays come the petticoat and the panniers and the underskirt and the gown, and the whole process will take until 10 and you'll explain it as it unfolds. Let me stop here and tell you what you need to understand about this world, about what clean means in 1699. Because without this, the rest of the story doesn't make sense. Clean, in the year of your arrival in Paris, is a visible category. It is something you can see. It is performed on the surface of the body, in the surface of the clothing, in the white linen at your collar and cuffs that tells every observer, this person's linen was changed this morning. This person's outward surfaces are attended to. This person is refined. What clean specifically, deliberately, and in the medical opinion of every respected physician working in France in this year, does not mean is the washing of the body. This is not ignorance. This is not laziness. This is the settled medical understanding of the time, supported by texts published by serious men who went to serious schools and thought carefully about the evidence available to them. The theory, water opens the pores of the skin. Open pores are a pathway for the bad air that carries pestilence, for the miasma of a city already full of invisible dangers, for every circulating illness that moves through dense populations of people living close together. Washing your hands, yes. Washing your face occasionally carefully. But the body, the whole body submerged in water, or even brought into extended contact with it, that is a risk. That is inviting something in. Instead, you use linen. Linen against skin, changed daily, laundered thoroughly, pressed flat and clean. Linen is your cleaning mechanism. The chemise under the stays, the shirt under the coat, the cuffs and collar visible at the edges of the outer garment. These are what the laundress sees. These are what get washed. These are what do the actual work of absorbing what the body produces, and then they're removed and laundered while clean linen takes their place. Your linen is clean. Your body, by the standards you grew up with, is not. And the silk over your linen, the gown, the mantua, the formal court dress in the locked room, never touches skin directly, never gets washed, and carries as its private record everything that has made its way through the linen layers over months of wearing. This is the system, and it almost works. The linen absorbs a great deal. The powder masks what the linen misses. The perfume transforms what the powder only covers. But under all the transforming and the covering and the masking, the gown still knows. The gown knows every room it has been in, every supper it has been worn to, every hour of dancing, every conversation held in front of a fireplace that was too warm, every time the stays shifted and the lining pressed differently against the back of the bodice. The gown carries its history, and your job for the next 6 days is to negotiate with that history on behalf of Wednesday's reception. The dressing continues in silence, or near silence. Madame du Plessis has made it clear that the morning routine does not require commentary, that the Comtesse's time between rising and being dressed is a particular kind of private time, a liminal space, and that your function in it is to move correctly and quickly, and without drawing attention to the fact that you are there at all. Over the stays comes the petticoat, not the one that will go to the laundry today. That is the formal petticoat, the silk one, the one pairing with the blue gown. But the morning petticoat, the everyday one in pale wool, because the Comtesse will not be going out in formal dress today. Today she will receive visitors in her morning gown, and attend to correspondence, and perhaps take a short carriage ride if the weather holds, and for all of this, the morning gown is sufficient. The morning gown is what it says, a gown for morning, for indoor use, for the hours before the world is officially watching. By the standards of anyone you knew in Rouen, it is magnificent. By the standards of this wardrobe, it is informal. It is a robe de chambre in rose silk, slightly quilted, trimmed at the cuffs and collar with a cream silk ribbon. It was made 3 years ago and has been worn by Madame du Plessis' count approximately 150 times. It is washed never, aired regularly, powdered at the collar and cuffs and at the seams where the quilting holds the most heat, and it carries 150 mornings of the Comtesse de Villeneuve, like a kind of textile diary of her private self. You lift it from the stand where it's been warming by the fire and help her into it. The silk settles over the stays, over the petticoat finding its shape. You do the front hooks, 12 of them, small and fiddly, requiring the same specific pressure on each one, not too hard or the silk at the buttonhole deforms. And then the collar. The collar closes with a bow at the neck. The bow must be exactly right, the size of it, the balance of the 2 loops, the way the ends fall, all of it specific, all of it part of the overall performance, even in the morning, even in the private rooms, because there are no fully private moments in a house where 30 people work and visitors arrive at 10 and the performance is never entirely off. You tie the bow. The Comtesse looks down at it. You adjust it by 3 millimeters to the left. She looks again. A small nod. You've gotten it right. Now, the hair. The hair in 1699 is its own education, separate from the education of the garments, equally demanding in its techniques, equally dependent on the gap between what the observer sees and what the work involves. The Comtesse's own hair is dark, fine, and not enough of it. not enough for the height and breadth the current fashion requires, which means additions. Pads of horsehair and wool wrapped in the Comtesse's own hair and pinned into place, adding volume at the crown and at the sides. Pomade, a mixture of lard and perfume that gives the hair the control and shine the style requires, and that also, over the course of a week between full dressings, accumulates at the scalp with the heat of the body and the powder that goes over it, and becomes, by the 5th or 6th day, something you approach with careful neutrality. For everyday mornings the hair is simpler. Not the full structure, not the height that takes Madame du Plessis 40 minutes to build and anchor. A simpler arrangement, soft at the sides, drawn back and up, covered in part by the small indoor cap that completes the morning look. You comb through carefully, working from the ends up toward the roots, and the comb, over the course of its passes, accumulates what the hair has been holding since its last full washing. The hair is washed. The Comtesse's actual hair, scalp and all, approximately once a month. Once a month in warm water with an egg-based preparation, carried out in the kitchen where there's enough space and enough hot water, assisted by Madame du Plessis and you and the first chambermaid who holds the basin. Between washings, the comb, the powder, the pomade, the additions that go on over and around it, and the cap that covers the arrangement during sleep. Once a month, you run the comb through a section of dark hair and think, with a corner of your mind that you've learned to keep separate from the part that's managing the comb's pressure and angle, about what once a month means, about the arithmetic of a month, about the 30 mornings this hair wakes up under the same cap, the 30 evenings it goes under it again, the accumulation of those 30 days concentrated at the roots, where the scalp does what scalps do regardless of rank or expense of gown. You finish the hair, you place the cap, you stand back and look, and the Comtesse, who was a tired 31-year-old woman when you walked into this room 40 minutes ago, is now not quite the Comtesse yet, not the full formal version, but a direction, a beginning, something that is heading over the next hours and the full dressing that will happen before she makes any formal appearance toward the person the world sees. "Bring me the letters," she says. You bring her the letters. She begins to read. You're dismissed until you're needed again, which is indicated not by words but by the particular way she sets the letters down, which means, I am ready for the next step. You go back to the wardrobe room. Madame du Plessis has moved on. The lace is fully separated from the gown's hem now, all of it, lying in a careful sequence on the left side of the table, each section placed in order so that when it goes back on, it returns to the precise position it came from. The lace, up close, away from the gown, in the better light that's coming now from the window, is extraordinary and terrible in equal measure. Extraordinary because it is what it is. Point de France, worked by women whose sole purpose for years was mastering this specific technique. Women who went blind doing it, who sat in lace workshops in the Loire Valley and Alençon and made these tiny, perfect repeated structures thread by thread. Terrible because it has been walked on. The damage is apparent now that the lace is separated from the silk. The darkening at the base of each repeat, the slight matting of the thread, the places where the ground net has been compressed by contact with floors. Madame du Plessis has set a basin of cold water on a low table near the window. Beside it, a cake of the mildest soap you've ever smelled. Almost no scent, barely there, designed to be invisible in the finished work. And beside the soap, a folded cloth of extremely fine muslin, that will be used to support the lace during washing rather than letting it bear its own weight against the tension of water. Watch, she says. Just watch, this first time. She lifts the first section of lace. She places it on the muslin cloth. She folds the cloth over and around it, creating a soft envelope, and she lowers the whole package into the water with both hands, moving slowly, keeping it horizontal. The lace sinks into the water, supported by the muslin, not touching the sides of the basin, not folded, not creased. She holds it there. You feel the water temperature, she says, without looking up. You reach over and put 2 fingers in the water. Cold. Not icy, but cold. Why cold? Hot water sets stains permanently into thread. Cold water lifts them. This is not always enough. Sometimes what's in the lace has been there long enough that cold water alone won't move it. But it's always the beginning. She lifts the muslin package slightly, lowers it again, a gentle motion, a coaxing. You are persuading it, not forcing. You watch her hands. The gentleness is precise. It's not the gentleness of someone being careful not to break something. It's the gentleness of someone who understands exactly what force the thing can bear and is staying just under it. The marks at the hem, you say. Will they come out? Some of them, not all. She lifts the package again, gently, a slow rhythm. The Point de France ground will recover better than the raised motifs. The raised work holds the dirt differently, in the spaces between the raised thread. You'll need to use the point of a very fine pin to work into those spaces after washing, 1 thread at a time in some places. 1 thread at a time. This will take the better part of 2 days. Just the lace. The gown itself is a separate matter. She glances up at you. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That the 6 days are fully scheduled. That the 6 days are fully scheduled, and that there is no margin for mistakes, and that the lace going back onto the gown is the last step and cannot be rushed, because if it's pinned incorrectly, the weight distribution is wrong and the hemline breaks. She returns to the lace. I've seen a hemline break at a reception. Once, the woman had to go home. Her modiste refused to see her the following season. A pause. The modiste was wrong to refuse, but the woman was also wrong to allow the hem to reach that state. These things have 2 kinds of wrong. You take that in. Go check the shoes, Madame Duplessis says. The blue ones, the pair with the silver buckle. Bring them here. The shoes are in the shoe cabinet, which is a narrow closet off the main wardrobe room, with shelves designed specifically for shoes, and enough pairs on them to make you slightly ill when you first counted them. The Comtesse's shoes are organised by colour and then by formality, and within those categories by age, newest at eye level, older farther from reach. You find the blue satin shoes, the ones that match the gown that is currently lying in pieces on the work table, and bring them to the light. The blue satin shoes. You hold one in each hand and look at them carefully. The uppers are pale blue silk with a decorative element, a small spray of embroidered silver flowers at the toe that echoes the silver thread in the gown. This pairing was deliberate, made by the shoemaker in consultation with the dressmaker who made the gown, so that the shoe and the gown speak to each other across the layers of the outfit. The heels are covered in the same blue silk and stand about 2.5 inches high, curved in the shape that has been fashionable for the past 15 years, a shape that does particular things to the posture that the stays have already begun, pushing the weight forward, adding to the overall effect of height and precision. The soles are leather. The soles show use. You turn the left shoe over and examine the sole. The heel leather is worn at the back outer corner. This is where the weight falls when you walk in heels of this height, and the leather has compressed there over 6 wearings. The surface worn smooth and slightly shiny. The ball of the foot has left its impression in the lining leather, a shallow concavity that is the exact shape of the Comtesse's forefoot. You bring them to Madame du Plessis. She glances at the sole of the one you offer first, runs her thumb across the worn corner of the heel. "The cobbler on the Rue des Francs Bourgeois," she says. "Take them this morning. Tell him Madame de Villeneuve needs them back by Friday. He knows the work." "And the upper?" She takes the shoe and tilts it toward the window light. Examining the satin upper, there is a mark on the satin. Very small. At the outer edge of the left shoe, at the point of the toe, where the silver embroidery stops and the plain silk begins. A darkness in the satin, no bigger than a thumbnail, the kind of mark that happens when a shoe is pressed against something, or when moisture has reached the silk from inside or outside. "Inside mark," Madame du Plessis says. Perspiration from the foot working through the lining. She examines it for another moment. "This can be addressed with the same preparation as the gown. Tell the cobbler to resilk the left toe panel when he resolves the heel. He'll need a small piece of the original silk. There should be a remnant in the material drawer, second shelf, the blue fabrics. Look for the paper packet labelled Villeneuve 1697. The year the shoes were made. A paper packet kept for 2 years against exactly this possibility. You go to the material drawer, second shelf. You find the blue fabric section. You find the packet labelled in Madame du Plessis' handwriting, neat and completely legible, the date and the commission and the quantity of remnant inside. You open it carefully. Inside, folded in acid-free paper, the kind used for preservation, is a square of blue satin approximately 4 inches across. The same shade exactly, the same weight, the same small irregularity in the weave at the selvage edge that identifies the bolt it came from. 2 years in a drawer in the dark, and it is as blue as the day it was cut. This is a system. You're beginning to understand what the system cost to build and maintain. Not just money, though the money is extraordinary, but time and attention and the willingness to manage a level of detail that most people don't know exists. The paper packet of remnant silk, the ribbon-coded parcels in the locked room, the sequential arrangement of the separated lace on the work table, the note in the ledger that Madame du Plessis keeps, a leather-bound book on the shelf above the work table, its pages dense with handwriting, that records every garment's wearing history, every repair, every problem addressed, and every problem deferred. The ledger, you say, every garment is in it. Every garment since I arrived in this house. She takes the remnant from you and checks the shade against the shoe, turning both toward the window. The ledger before mine was kept by the woman I replaced. Her records go back to when the Comtesse was 15 and first began acquiring a serious wardrobe. What happens to the ledger when... You stop. When what? When the Comtesse dies? When Madame du Plessis retires? When the world changes? It stays with the wardrobe, Madame du Plessis says, as though the question is simple, which for her it is. The garments and the records of the garments. The person changes, the wardrobe continues. She wraps the remnant in fresh paper, hands you the shoes wrapped in cloth, gives you 2 livres for the cobbler. Be back by 9, she says. We'll begin the spirits of wine test on the bodice seam before the Comtesse has her second visitor. You take the shoes and the 2 livres and your plain grey wool dress that smells of wood smoke from the kitchen fires below, and you go out into Paris. The gate opens, and Paris comes in, not gradually, not in pieces, the way smells had come to you through the wardrobe window. All at once, the full weight of it, sound and smell and cold and movement, everything landing simultaneously like a hand pressed flat against your chest. October in the Marais, 6 streets from the Hôtel de Villeneuve. The world is operating at a register entirely different from the wardrobe room. The first thing is the mud. October mud, specific in its properties, thicker than summer mud, which is more of a slick, and different from winter mud, which at least has the decency to freeze occasionally. October mud is deep and deliberate. It fills the gaps between the cobblestones, and it covers the cobblestones themselves, in the places where foot traffic has worked it over them, and it splashes when a wheel goes through it. You step out of the gate and immediately shift your path to the higher ground near the wall, where the mud is slightly less, where previous feet have compressed it enough that your shoes don't go in past the sole. Your shoes are plain leather, stout, designed for walking, designed to be cleaned. They have been cleaned. They will need cleaning again by the time you reach the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois. You think, briefly, of the blue satin shoes wrapped in cloth under your arm, and what would happen to the blue satin shoes in this mud, and you understand, perhaps for the first time with your whole body rather than just your head, why the Comtesse does not walk in the streets. The Comtesse moves through Paris in a closed carriage. She's delivered to the entrance of wherever she's going, and the entrance is attended by someone whose function is to see that she doesn't have to navigate anything between the carriage door and the building. She steps from carriage to doorstep without her shoes touching anything that might soil them. Her gown is handed in and out of the carriage by someone, by you increasingly, as you learn the technique of managing large quantities of silk through a carriage door without letting it drag. Her existence in Paris is a series of enclosed, attended, controlled environments connected by a sealed vehicle. This is not a luxury. This is a structural requirement. The shoes, the gown, the 15 layers of formal dress, none of them can survive contact with the city as it actually is. You pick your way along the wall. The Marais in October mid-morning is fully operational. The quarter was fashionable 50 years ago, when the great hotels particuliers went up one after another behind their walls, when the Place Royale was the centre of fashionable Paris, when nobility clustered here. It is less fashionable now. Fashion has moved toward the Faubourg Saint-Germain, toward the new quartiers on the left bank, and some of the great houses in the Marais have been subdivided, their courtyards rented out, their noble inhabitants replaced by prosperous merchants and lawyers who can afford the space. But it is still, in its bones, a respectable quarter, and on its main streets the activity is the activity of money and purpose. The street in front of the Hôtel de Villeneuve has a bakery 2 doors down that is doing steady business. The smell of fresh bread comes out of it in waves, real wheat bread, the kind that costs, and the queue extends 3 people out the door. Next to that, a stationer whose window displays printed gazettes and a hand-lettered notice announcing new stock of writing paper from the Netherlands. Next to that, a linen draper's. Next to that, a wine merchant whose delivery of barrels this morning is causing a secondary mud situation in front of his door as the barrels are rolled across the wet street. You navigate around the wine merchant's barrels, and then the street opens up slightly and you see what you always see in the Marais, what you see everywhere in Paris once you know to look for it, the layering. The fine house and the crowded tenement 12 feet apart sharing a wall. The noble carriage navigating a street that also contains a pig. Genuinely a pig. rooting through the pile of rubbish against the wall of the building opposite, its owner apparently somewhere else, its existence in this street evidently unremarkable to everyone except you. The woman in a silk dress, almost as fine as anything in the secondary wardrobe room, picking her way along the raised footpath with the careful steps of someone who has done this calculation 1,000 times, who knows exactly how far she can let the hem drop before the mud reaches it. The man in a labourer's coat sitting on a step eating something from his bare hand, watching the woman in silk pass with an expression you can't quite read from across the street. The distance between them, in metres, is perhaps 15 feet. In every other respect, it is the distance between different planets. You've been in Paris 23 days, and you're beginning to understand that Paris is not one city. It is 10 or 20 cities stacked on top of each other, occupying the same streets simultaneously, barely aware of each other except as obstacles or opportunities. The world of the Hôtel de Villeneuve and the world of the pig and the labourer on the step coexist on this street every morning, and the coexistence is managed by a complicated system of not looking, of looking in the right direction at the right moment, of understanding exactly who you are in the hierarchy of the street, and therefore what you're entitled to see. You are, right now, somewhere in the middle. You're not the Comtesse. You'll never be mistaken for the Comtesse, not in your grey wool with your market basket and the parcel of shoes under your arm. But you're not the pig's owner either, and the way you carry yourself, the way 3 weeks in the wardrobe room have already adjusted your posture and your pace and the steadiness of your gaze, marks you as someone in service to a serious household, someone with a task and a destination, and no time for the particular expressions of Parisian street life that are directed at young women on their own. Well, that's what you're aiming for. The cobbler on the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois is a short walk. You know the way now. You've been sent on errands 3 times in your first weeks, always with very specific instructions and a deadline, always with the same reminder from Madame Duplessis that errands are not occasions and that the streets between here and wherever you're going are not Paris. They're a path through Paris, and the difference matters. You walk the path through Paris. The Rue des Francs-Bourgeois runs east-west through the Marais, one of the older streets, its name dating from a time when the inhabitants were exempt from certain taxes, the Franc-Bourgeois, the free citizens. The exemption is ancient history now, but the name stays, the way names in Paris stay long after the thing they described has changed into something else entirely. Streets named for guilds that haven't existed in a century. Streets named for buildings that burned down. Streets named for saints whose churches are now used for something else. The cobbler's shop is halfway along, marked by the sign that all cobblers have, the carved wooden boot painted black that hangs above the door. You go in. The smell inside is leather and adhesive, and the particular warmth of a small space with a low fire kept burning not for comfort, but for the heat the work needs. Glue, wax, the tools that must be warmed to do their job properly. The cobbler himself is a compact man of perhaps 50 with hands that have done this work since he was 10 years old, the joints enlarged and the skin darkened in the creases, hands that know leather the way Madame Duplessis' hands know silk. He looks up when you come in. Hôtel de Villeneuve, you say, because that's how this works, because in the cobbler's mental geography his customers are households, not individuals, because your name is not what matters here. He nods. He knows. You unwrap the shoes. He takes them and turns them in those hands of his, examining the sole, the heel, the upper, and then the mark on the left shoe's toe panel, which you show him without being asked, because you've been told by Madame Duplessis that cobblers who serve serious households expect the full picture before they give you a time and a price. The heel is straightforward, he says. His voice has a southern accent somewhere in the Languedoc originally, softened by however many years in Paris. The silk panel, he looks at it again, close. I'll need to see the remnant. You hand him the paper packet. He opens it, checks the shade, holds the remnant against the shoe, then toward the window, then back against the shoe. Good match. He folds it closed and sets it beside the shoe. Friday's possible if you leave them now. The silk panel is the delicate part. I need a full day to let the adhesive set properly before I can work over it. He looks at you. Friday morning or Friday afternoon? Friday morning if possible. The gown is needed Wednesday evening. Friday morning. He notes something in his head, or maybe literally in a book somewhere behind the counter. The price is... He names it, and you've been told the expected price by Madame du Plessis before you left, and the price he's named is 2 sous above that, and you've been told what to say in that situation. Madame du Plessis mentioned the account stands current, you say, which is the phrase which means the household pays promptly and expects the courtesy of the expected price. He looks at you for a moment with something that might be amusement. He adjusts the price to what Madame du Plessis said it should be. Friday morning, he says again. Tell du Plessis the silk panel will be as close as I can make it. Remnant silk is never exactly the same as the original. It's been sitting in a different environment, but it'll be close. She'll want to see the shoes before they go back to the Comtesse. She always does. He wraps the shoes carefully in his own cloth, sets them on the shelf behind him in the specific location that presumably corresponds to Friday. Your name? Marguerite, second lady's maid. He nods. Tell du Plessis the heels on the red shoes are getting to the point where they'll need addressing next season. I noticed when those came in last month. Madame du Plessis mentioned nothing about the red shoes, which means either she already knows or the cobbler saw something she didn't, and in either case you file this information in the part of your mind reserved for things that need to be reported. I'll tell her, you say. You go back out into the street. You have until 9. The cobbler took perhaps 10 minutes. The walk back will take perhaps 10 minutes. That leaves you, you calculate, about 20 minutes. Which is not nothing, which is actually enough to see one thing or do one errand. And Madame du Plessis didn't say specifically what route to take back. She said be back by 9, and the direct route takes 8 minutes and the indirect route takes 15, and if you take the indirect route, you take the indirect route. This is not strictly within the instructions, but it is not strictly outside them either, and you've been in Paris for 23 days, and you've seen the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois and the Rue de Bretagne, and the parts of the Marais that are on the direct path between the hotel and the various suppliers, and you haven't yet seen the used clothing market, the Marché des Fripiers, the second-hand clothing trade. You know it exists. Everyone knows it exists. In a city where a new silk gown costs what it costs, and where silk is silk regardless of whose body has worn it, and where there is always someone who needs the appearance of something they cannot afford, and someone else who needs the money more than they need the appearance. In that city, which is every city, the second-hand trade is enormous and organised, and in certain respects quietly scandalous, because what moves through the second-hand market includes things that were not supposed to leave the households they came from. You haven't specifically been forbidden from looking at the market. You walk toward it. The fripiers, the dealers in second-hand clothing, operate in a cluster of streets near the Place de Grève, and the market has a smell before it has a sight. The smell is the smell of the wardrobe room's secondary room, but multiplied by the number of garments in every secondary room in Paris, all brought together in an open space without the cedar and the sachets to manage them. The smell of stored cloth, of powder applied over many months, of the particular quality of silk that has been lived in. You know this smell now. 3 weeks ago you wouldn't have recognized it. Now it's as specific to you as the smell of bread is specific to someone who bakes it. You enter the market. The first thing that strikes you is the quantity. Garments hang from lines strung between posts and from the walls of the buildings on either side of the lane. They are densely packed, so densely that in places you have to push silk aside to pass through, and it falls against your face with the strange intimacy of cloth that has been someone else's. Coats and mantuas and petticoats and underskirts and riding habits and robes de chambre, in every colour and every degree of condition from nearly new to terminally past it, all jumbled together by the logic of the dealer's stock rather than any system of formality or season. And the dealers, the fripiers, are mostly women. They stand at intervals along the lanes, at their stalls or in doorways, and they watch the market with the alert attention of people whose income depends on the accuracy of their judgment. They're looking at what passes. They're looking at what people touch. They're looking at you. You're being assessed. This is something you understand in the first 30 seconds. The fripiers are reading you the way Madame Duplessis reads a fabric. They want to know what you can afford, what you're looking for, whether you're here to buy or to sell, whether you're here on your own behalf or on someone else's. The answers to these questions determine what they show you and at what price. You project, on behalf of someone else, not for myself, looking, not yet buying. A woman at the nearest stall, perhaps 40, with the shrewd eyes of a person who's been doing this a long time, catches your gaze and holds it for just a fraction of a second longer than is casual. Not challenging, inquiring, you look at her stall. The stall is arranged, you realize, with some intelligence. The freshest looking pieces toward the front where they catch the light and the eye. The more worn pieces further back, where they're visible but not the first thing you see. And on the far side of the stall, hanging separately from the main display, a small collection of pieces that are, you look more carefully, in better condition than anything else here. Much better. Almost as good as new. May I, you ask, gesturing toward the better pieces. The woman looks at you, looks at your dress, your apron, the quality of the linen at your collar, calculates. Lady's maid, she asks. Yes. To a serious house? Yes. She nods, almost imperceptibly, and makes a small motion with one hand that says, yes, go ahead. You go closer to the better pieces. They're not what you expected. They are. Your hands are reaching toward one before your mind has caught up. They're quite extraordinary. A mantua in deep green silk, the brocade pattern almost indistinguishable from the pattern in garments in the Comtesse's wardrobe. A petticoat in ivory with silver thread edging that is, you examine the thread, actually Point de France, second-hand Point de France. How does this, you start. Estates, the woman says. She doesn't say it apologetically. She says it the way one professional addresses another, sharing the basic mechanics of the trade. When a woman of quality dies, her wardrobe passes to the heirs. Heirs often don't want the clothing. They want the money. A lady's maid who has served the household well sometimes receives pieces as a portion of her wages. Women who fall on difficulties sell what they have, she pauses. Garments come here many ways. And you can tell where they've come from? She raises one eyebrow at this question, which is, you realize even as you're asking it. both naive and slightly impolite. Of course she can tell where they've come from. Telling where they've come from is half her skill. I can tell the maker, usually, she says carefully. I can tell the age. I can tell how many times it's been worn and whether it's been well kept. A beat. I don't always tell who it belonged to. That's not my business. But sometimes you know. I usually know. The same careful neutrality. This isn't useful information to share. You understand. Discretion moves in both directions in this world. The fripier is, in her own register, in exactly the same position as the lady's maid. She knows things that need not be repeated, because repeating them would damage the system that allows the things to exist in the first place. If the world knew that the green silk mantua in front of you, and you're looking at it closely now, close enough to be sure, that this particular mantua, with the specific irregularity in the brocade repeat that indicates a Lyonnaise workshop that you've seen the products of in the secondary wardrobe room, if the world knew whose house this came from, it would be useful to some people and damaging to others. The fripier knows. The fripier is not saying. You look at the Pointe de France petticoat. It is genuinely extraordinary. The laces. You've just spent 2 hours watching Madame Duplessis wash Pointe de France. You know now what you're looking at. The lace is fine and in good condition. Better condition than the lace currently soaking in the basin at the Hôtel de Villeneuve. Someone has taken care of it. The garment that contributed it was maintained properly. This would go to someone who wants the appearance, you say. Most things do. Someone who wants to look like she's wearing a court petticoat without paying court petticoat prices. Yes, she watches you. The lace alone on a petticoat like that, new, is, well, you know what it is. Working where you work. You do know. You've just spent 2 hours with your hands a foot away from lace, costing roughly what your father earns in a year. The lace on this petticoat, new, would have been in that range. Second-hand from this stall it's a fraction. A large fraction still by most people's standards, but a fraction. The woman who buys this, you say, she goes to a reception wearing the lace, and no one knows, because the only people who know are the people who made it, the people who originally wore it, and the people like you and me who work close enough to see the difference. A small pause. And most people at receptions are not close enough to see the difference. You stand in front of the green silk mantua for another moment. You're thinking about the Comtesse, about the 72 garments in the locked room, about the 6 wearings and the perspiration marks and the 24 hours of accumulated biological fact, about the lace currently lying in sections on the work table at the hotel, being returned to something close to what it was. And you're thinking about this stall and what it says about the system. The system produces garments that are too expensive to be worn to ruin, too intimate to be properly cleaned, and eventually too worn to be worn by the person they were made for. At that point, they enter the second-hand market. They move down the hierarchy. The great noblewoman's cast-off becomes the lesser noblewoman's aspiration. The lesser noblewoman's cast-off becomes a merchant's wife's occasion dress. The merchant's wife's cast-off becomes the upper servant's good Sunday coat. And somewhere at the end of the process, the silk is cut up for patchwork or the ribbons repurposed for something else, and the garment stops being a garment and becomes material. The whole time, the fabric carries what it carries. Nobody washes it in between. It moves down the hierarchy wearing the evidence of every body it's touched. You take a step back from the stall. "Thank you," you say to the woman. She nods. She's already looking past you to someone else. You walk back toward the hotel, faster now because the 20 minutes are becoming 10 minutes, and Madame Duplessis said 9, and you've been told what 9 means. The mud is still there, the pig is still there, or a different pig, rooting in a different spot along the wall. The noise of Paris is at full volume now, mid-morning, everything running simultaneously. The vendors and the carts and the 2 arguments happening at different corners of the same intersection, and the sound of hammering from somewhere above, someone repairing a roof or building something, the sharp, repetitive percussion of it mixing with everything else. You walk quickly and you think. You think about the woman in silk picking her way along the footpath, about the cobbler's hands and the paper packet of 2-year-old remnant silk, about the fripier's careful silence about where the green mantua came from, about Madame Duplessis and her 20-year ledger and her 45 minutes on the 1st inch of lace. You think about what all of these things are in service of. One woman, one body. The body that stood in the firelight this morning, tired and 31 before the process began. The machine is enormous. The machine involves the fripier and the cobbler and the lace makers in Alençon and the silk weavers in Lyon and the whale whose bones are in the stays and the powder manufacturers and the ladies' maids and the ledger and the locked room and the paper packets. Dozens of people, hundreds of skills, coordinated across years. And the product of the machine is a woman who walks into a room on Wednesday evening and the room sees the Comtesse de Villeneuve. The room doesn't see the 6 wearings in the bodice seam. It doesn't see the lace that was detached this morning and is currently soaking in cold water in a basin. It doesn't see the shoes at the cobbler's with the replaced silk panel. It doesn't see you. You are part of the machine, and the machine's success depends on being invisible, and you're very good at being invisible. You're learning to be better every day, and this is fine. This is the job. This is what you came to Paris for. You're back at the gate by 8:57. 3 minutes to spare. Madame Duplessis is not the kind of person who acknowledges 3 minutes to spare, but she's also not the kind of person who fails to notice it. You've learned to read the particular absence of criticism as its own form of record-keeping. Cobbler, she says, without looking up from the lace. He'll have them by Friday morning. He mentioned the heel on the left shoe and a small mark on the toe silk. He has the remnant. He also said the red shoes will need attention next season. I know about the red shoes. She's working with a very fine pin now, moving through the Pointe de France with the patience of someone for whom time moves at the speed of thread. This spirits of wine preparation is on the shelf. The small bottle, the glass stopper, the label in my hand. You find it. The muslin cloths beside it. The 3rd smallest size. Not the finest, not the coarsest. We're going to test on the inner side of the seam first, where the mark is least visible. If the silk takes the treatment without damage, we proceed to the mark itself. You bring the bottle and the cloths to the work table. Dip the cloth, she says, once. Drain it against the inside of the bottleneck so it's damp, not wet. You want just enough spirit to lift the surface mark without soaking the weave underneath. You dip the cloth. Drain it. The smell of the spirits of wine is sharp and clean, almost startling against the wardrobe room's ambient layers, something astringent, something that cuts through. Now, inner side of the seam, the area that corresponds to the mark on the outer side but hidden. Make contact with the cloth, the lightest possible pressure. Hold for 3 seconds. Lift. Don't rub. You do exactly this. 3 seconds. Lift. You check the cloth. There's a very faint darkening on the muslin. The spirits of wine have lifted something from the silk, something that was sitting in the weave, not deep, not the worst of it, but something. You check the silk. The silk is unchanged. The weave is intact. The colour is exactly what it was. No spreading, no puckering, no damage. Again, says Madame du Plessis, still working on the lace without looking at you. 3 seconds. Lift. Use a fresh section of cloth each time so you're lifting, not redistributing. You do it again. This time the cloth lifts more. The accumulation in the weave responding to the treatment, releasing what it's been holding. You do it a 3rd time and a 4th. By the 8th application, the cloth is coming away much lighter. The silk, examined in the window light, shows. You tilt it. You're learning to read fabric in different light the way Madame du Plessis does, using the angle to reveal what straight-on viewing hides. The silk shows an improvement. The mark is still there. The mark is not going to vanish entirely, you understand this now, but it is lighter than it was, and lighter means less visible, and less visible from across a room means wearable. The mark, Madame du Plessis asks? Improved. Significantly. I'd say you tilt the fabric again, considering perhaps half, maybe more. Show me. She sets down her pin as her lace and comes to stand beside you. She takes the fabric and tilts it exactly as you tilted it, reads it in the same light. 2/3, she says, not half. She sets it back down. We'll do another 4 applications after the lunch hour when the fabric has rested. By tomorrow morning, if the silk has continued to release, we may have the mark to the point where the bodice structure alone will cover it. And if not, we move the side seam 3/8 of an inch. It's within the boning channel. The adjustment won't show on the outer surface. She moves back to her lace. But I believe it will be sufficient. The silk is responding. A pause. It wants to let go. The morning passes in this rhythm. The lace and the bodice mark and the small focused silence of the wardrobe room, punctuated by the sounds of the house coming to life around you. The visitors arriving below, the bell ringing for the Comtesse's second audience, the cook shouting at someone in the kitchen in a register that penetrates even the wardrobe room walls. By the time the bells of the nearby church mark 11, you have completed the spirits of wine treatment, treated a second smaller mark at the collar edge that you found while working, and begun learning the first stages of Pointe de France handling under Madame du Plessis' instruction. The lace handling is its own language. The weight of the thread is different from any lace you've touched before. Heavier than it looks, because the density of the work per square inch is greater than almost anything else made. And the structure, the way the raised motifs relate to the ground net, the way the 2 elements of the lace have a conversation with each other that you can't fully decode yet but are beginning to hear. You have good hands, Madame du Plessis says. You stop. This is a different register from on time. The lace, she continues, not looking up, working the pin with absolute steadiness. You're not fighting it. Most new girls fight the lace. They're too anxious about damaging it, and the anxiety makes them stiff. And stiff hands create exactly the kind of pressure that does damage. She glances up briefly, glances back down. Your hands are right. You don't say anything. You're not sure what you'd say. Don't get comfortable, she adds. Good hands with basic technique doesn't mean you know what you're doing yet. It means you have the foundation to learn. A pause. But the foundation matters. You go back to the thread. Outside, the church bells ring 12. Lunch is a bowl of soup from the kitchen, brought up to the wardrobe room because Madame du Plessis eats at her work, and on the days when the wardrobe work is active, she expects the same from you. The soup is cabbage and salt pork, thick and hot, and you eat it from a clay bowl standing at the end of the work table away from the gown. The salt pork has more fat than meat, but the fat is the point. The fat is the warmth. And after 6 hours in a room heated only by 2 candles and 1 small brazier and the ambient temperature of the floor above the kitchen, the warmth is what your body's asking for. Madame du Plessis eats her soup and looks at the lace. She looks at it the way you might look at a problem you've been working on for a long time, and that is beginning, finally, to show you its solution. "Tell me," she says, "what you saw in the market this morning." You look at her. "The fripiers," she says. "You went past the fripiers. I can tell from the direction you came from when you came back through the gate." There is nothing accusatory in her voice. She's simply stating a fact about facts, the way she states everything. "I went to look," you say. "I didn't. I know you didn't buy anything. You haven't been here long enough to have anything to spend on anything." She sets her empty soup bowl aside. "Bowl, what did you see?" You tell her about the stall, the green silk mantua, the Pointe de France petticoat, the fripier's careful silence about provenance. Madame du Plessis listens without interrupting. When you finish, she's quiet for a moment. "You recognize the brocade," she says. "I think so. The pattern, the repeat spacing." "You're right." She says it simply. "That mantua came from a household I know. The woman who sold it is the lady's maid who worked there before the lady died. It was part of her final wages." She picks up the pin. "A practice so old it doesn't have a name anymore. The lady's maid inherits a portion of the wardrobe. She can keep it, which is impractical, because where is a lady's maid going to wear a silk mantua? Or she can sell it. The fripiers know which households are worth watching. When a death occurs, they come before the estate is fully settled sometimes. Discreet, but quick. That seems..." You stop. "Efficient," she offers. "I was going to say something else. Something about the relationship between a person's life and their possessions, and what happens to those possessions after..." She makes a small gesture with the pin, which seems to encompass the entire philosophical problem and set it aside simultaneously. Yes, it is something, but it is also how the world works. The silk doesn't die when the person dies. The silk continues. The silk has another 20 or 30 years of useful life in it, if it's maintained properly. To let it sit in a sealed room forever would be its own kind of waste. She returns to the lace. "The fripier on that stall is a good woman," she adds, as though this is directly relevant to the previous point, which maybe it is. "She keeps things properly. I've bought from her twice." "You've bought from the second-hand market?" "I've acquired materials from the second-hand market when the materials were in better condition than what was available new." She says it without apology and without emphasis. This is not a contradiction. This is judgment. A pause. A modiste who refuses to consider second-hand materials on principle is either very wealthy or very stupid. I am neither. You look at the lace currently laid out on the table. "The lace that came off the gown," you say slowly. "After we clean it and reset it. It's the original lace. It goes back on the gown it came from. But if a piece needed to be replaced, I would find matching Pointe de France. New if the quality is right and the price is possible. Second hand if the match is closer and the condition is good." She glances at you. "What matters is that the gown works. The gown is what has to walk into the Daumont reception on Wednesday evening and be the Comtesse de Villeneuve. Not the lace's history, not the silks, the gown." You think about that. the gown as a thing separate from its components, the gown as a social object, a performance, an entity that has its own identity independent of the materials that make it or the body that wears it. The gown is the Comtesse de Villeneuve. The Comtesse de Villeneuve in this gown is a specific version of herself, her most formal version, her dormant reception version, her 6 wearings worth of evenings version. The gown contains those evenings. The gown carries them into the next one, and you are responsible for making sure those evenings are carried invisibly. The afternoon continues. By 2 in the afternoon, the second set of spirits of wine applications is done, and the mark on the bodice seam has retreated to something that Madame du Plessis examines in the window light and pronounces manageable. Not gone, managed. There is a difference, and you are learning to live inside it. The lace is still soaking. Parts of it are soaking. Parts of it have been lifted from the basin, supported on the muslin cloth, and laid flat to dry on a clean towel on the secondary table that Madame du Plessis has set up specifically for this purpose, this table covered in layers of clean cloth and positioned near enough to the window for the air to reach it, but not so near that the afternoon light, when the afternoon sun finally breaks through the October cloud, falls directly on the surface and bleaches what you're trying to restore. The drying lace, viewed from above, is extraordinary. Clean water has done what 3 months of powder and cedar could not. It has returned a transparency to the ground net, a clarity to the white thread that makes the raised motifs visible in the way they were designed to be seen. The pattern, flowers and scrolling leaves, a classical motif that has been in the repertoire of the Alençon lacemakers for 30 years, comes forward out of the net as the water retreats from the thread, like something emerging from fog. You stand over it for a moment longer than is strictly necessary. Madame du Plessis, at the far end of the table, is doing the same thing. She doesn't say anything, but her stillness over the drying lace is itself a form of acknowledgement of the same thing you're experiencing, the particular quality of attention that a beautiful piece of restored work commands, even from someone who has seen it 100 times, even from someone for whom beauty is not the point. Function is the point. Wearability is the point. Wednesday evening is the point. The lace will be ready to work with tomorrow morning, she says. Early. 5. Yes, Madame du Plessis. I'll begin resetting the first meter. You'll watch until I'm satisfied you understand the tension required, and then you'll take the second meter. The lace runs to approximately 8 meters around the full circumference of the gown. 8 meters of point de France reattached to the hem of a silk gown that cannot be washed, using a technique that must produce a result invisible to anyone who is not holding a candle 2 inches from the fabric. You do not say, that will take a long time. You say, yes, Madame du Plessis. She goes back to work. You go back to work. The afternoon in the wardrobe room develops its own rhythm. The sounds of the house move around it. The Comtesse having her third visitor, a woman whose laugh reaches even up here, high and slightly too loud for the rooms below. The cook arguing again with someone, a different someone this time, the argument tracking through its stages toward the particular silence that means a resolution of some kind. The bell that marks the Comtesse's carriage being called for. The sound of wheels on cobbles below as it enters the courtyard. The sound of it leaving. The afternoon light changes. The window goes from a grey autumn white to a warm low gold, and then begins to dim, October announcing its intentions. You light a second candle on the work table. Madame du Plessis does not look up. The gown will need a full airing before Wednesday, she says. Not today. The fabric needs to rest after the spirits of wine treatment, at least until tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, if the weather holds, we'll bring it to the courtyard garden in the early morning before the sun reaches the south wall. 2 hours maximum. You'll stand with it. Stand with it. You'll stand with the gown while it airs. You don't leave it. You don't let rest on any surface except the line Bertrand will set up. The lower maid, she knows the procedure. You watch the sky. If there's any change in the weather, any wind beyond what I'd call a gentle movement, you bring it back in immediately, because silken wind twists, twisted silk creases. Creases in this weight of brocade take 3 days to fall out fully. We don't have 3 days after the airing. She finally looks up. You understand that every decision about this gown over the next 6 days is about Wednesday, not about today, not about tomorrow. Everything is about Wednesday. I understand. Good. Back to the lace. In the morning, after the resetting begins, I'll speak with the Comtesse about a preliminary fitting. Not the full dressing, just the gown over the existing stays so I can assess the fall of the bodice after the seam treatment. She'll come here, you'll be present. The Comtesse coming to the wardrobe room is, you've gathered, not routine. The wardrobe room is where the work happens, not where the results are presented, but for a serious fitting, for a gown that's been modified and treated. Madame Duplessis wants to see the garment on the body in the actual room where the light is controlled, where she can walk around it, where the work table is available if something needs immediate attention. What should I have ready? The spirit of wine preparation, in case the fitting reveals any additional marks under the bodice, the fine pins in the blue case on the third shelf, a selection of the grey ribbons. Bring 3 options. The Comtesse indicated grey, but grey is a range. And warm the fitting room, she pauses. Not this room. The room adjacent. The one with the longer mirror. There is a room with a longer mirror. You've walked past it, but haven't been properly inside it yet. It's accessed through a door on the far side of the secondary wardrobe room, and it contains a full-length mirror in a gilded frame and a small raised platform. A fitting platform, you've been told, standard in any serious household, standard in any modiste's workshop, that allows the person being fitted to be seen from below at the level of the hem, which is the level at which hems matter. The fire in the fitting room, Madame Duplessis continues. Have it lit an hour before. The Comtesse's skin reacts to cold during a fitting. The muscles contract and the bodice reads differently than it will in a warm room. Everything is a variable. Every variable has a consequence. The consequences chain outward toward Wednesday. You write nothing down. Madame Duplessis has never offered you a notebook, and you understand this is deliberate. The work lives in your head, the way it lives in her head, because a lady's maid who needs notes is a lady's maid who cannot be fully trusted in the moment when notes are not available, which is every moment that matters. You commit everything to the part of your memory that is becoming, day by day, the wardrobe room part. Organised differently from your ordinary memory, operating on a different logic, a logic of dependency and sequence and consequence. If this, then that, then this. The day closes. 6 days until the reception. 6 days is a long time when you know what the days contain. 6 days is no time at all. The second day begins at 4, which is not earlier than the first day, but feels earlier because your sleep was disrupted by something. A cart on the street below, or the sound of rain starting, or just the particular anxiety of knowing what the morning holds. The wardrobe room at 5, the lace that needs to be reattached correctly, the rain. You hear the rain before you're fully awake, and the rain is a problem. Rain means humidity. Humidity means the lace that has been drying flat on the secondary table is absorbing moisture from the air, is softening in ways that will affect how it handles under the needle. Rain means the airing of the gown, scheduled, weather permitting, for the day after tomorrow, is now weather not permitting. Rain means the courtyard cobbles will be wet through the morning, and any errand involving fabric must involve extra wrapping, extra coverage, extra care. You dress faster than usual and go down to the wardrobe room. Madame du Plessis is already there, already examining the dried lace by candlelight, already reading the effect of the overnight humidity on the thread. Rain, you say. I'm aware of the rain. She doesn't look up. The lace has taken in some moisture. It will need another hour before it's in the correct state for resetting. We'll work on the bodice while we wait. You work on the bodice. The bodice this morning, after its overnight rest, has released more of the mark than it held at the end of the spirits of wine treatment yesterday. The silk has continued doing, in the dark and at rest, what it began doing under the cloth, releasing the accumulation in the weave slowly, the way a cloth that's been wrung out continues to release water after you set it down. The mark is now, in the morning candlelight, barely a shadow, the kind of shadow that exists only when you know to look for it, that disappears at arm's length, that will disappear entirely against the structure of the bodice once the stays beneath it push the silk into its correct line. You tell Madame du Plessis this. She comes and looks. Sufficient, she says. This is the highest register of her approval vocabulary you're learning. Sufficient means, I am satisfied. The world may proceed. The lace resetting begins at 7. Watching Madame du Plessis reset Pont-de-France onto a silk hem is, you don't have a word for it yet. You'll develop the word later, over months and years of watching skilled work and understanding what separates skilled from ordinary. But for now you just watch and feel the lack of adequate language for what you're seeing. The needle moves with a precision that operates below the level of visible decision-making. She isn't deciding where to place each stitch, she knows, and the knowing is in her hands rather than her mind, and her mind is somewhere else, observing, checking, available if the hands need consultation but mostly not needed. The stitch she uses attaches the lace to the silk without pulling either element. The lace maintains its weight, its fall, its own internal tension, and the silk beneath it is untouched. The stitch passes through the very edge of the silk, just enough to hold, not enough to create any deformation in the weave. Your turn, Madame du Plessis says. You've been watching for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of 1 metre of lace being reattached with approximately 160 stitches. She hands you the needle. You look at the remaining 7 metres of lace. You look at the needle. You make your first stitch. Madame du Plessis watches it. Again, she says. She doesn't say it's wrong. She says again, which is its own form of instruction. The instruction to look at what you did and understand why again is the answer. You make the second stitch. She says nothing, which means the second stitch is closer to correct. You make the third stitch. Stop, she says. Feel the difference between the second and third. You feel between the stitches with your fingertip, pressing very lightly, reading the tension the way you're learning to read fabric. Through the fingertip first, through the pressure and resistance before the eye gets involved. The third stitch is tighter than the second, only slightly, a fraction that your eye wouldn't have caught. But your fingertip, guided by Madame du Plessis' instruction to feel rather than look, finds it. Too tight, Too tight means the silk will pull toward the lace over time. In one wearing, it becomes visible at the hem as a slight gathering. She takes the needle back, removes the third stitch with 3 precise movements, and returns the needle. Again, you make the stitch again. This time you feel the moment when the tension is right. A very particular moment. Almost a click. Almost a rightness that doesn't click, but that the hand recognizes as complete in exactly the way that an incomplete stitch doesn't trigger. Yes, Madame du Plessis says. You continue. The morning passes in stitches. The rain continues outside. Not heavy but steady, persistent. The kind of October rain that has committed to being there and isn't interested in changing its mind. The wardrobe room is quiet except for the sound of it against the window and the occasional sounds of the household below, and you sew, and Madame du Plessis sews, and the lace returns, metre by painstaking metre, to the hem of the blue silk gown. By noon you have completed your first full metre. Madame du Plessis examines it. She examines it from above, then from below, then tilts the hem toward the window to read the stitches in the diffuse light, then takes it to the candle, which she positions below and to the left, and examines the resulting shadows in the lace. The tension is inconsistent in the third section, she says, here and here. She touches 2 points on the lace without quite touching it, indicating by proximity. These 4 stitches are marginally looser than the others. Over time, with the weight of the hem and the movement of walking, these 4 stitches will be the first to fail. You look where she's indicating. You cannot see the difference. Not yet. Not with your eye. I'll rework them, you say. You'll rework them now and then continue. The lunch can wait. The lunch can wait. You rework the 4 stitches. The incorrectness of them, once pointed out, begins to make itself available to your sense of it. A faint ghost of a difference in the resistance of the thread. The way correctly tensioned and incorrectly tensioned work have a different quality under the fingertip. You start to feel it rather than see it. After the rework, better, Madame du Plessis says. Just better, not sufficient. But better is something. You eat your lunch standing at the end of the work table. Soup again, different soup. And you look out the rain-grey window at the courtyard below, where the wet cobbles reflect the pale sky, and a servant is crossing from the kitchen to the main house, with something covered in a cloth held over his head against the rain, moving quickly, his shoes finding the gaps between the puddles with the unconscious accuracy of someone who crosses this courtyard 50 times a day. 5 days until the reception. On the 3rd day, the rain stops. The courtyard dries. The airing of the gown happens between 7 and 9 in the morning. A pale October sunlight. The silk hung on a line that Bertrand, the lower maid, a girl 2 years younger than you from somewhere in the north, with red hands and a nervous disposition that manifests as excessive thoroughness, sets up in the southeast corner of the garden, which gets light but not direct sun until mid-morning. You stand with the gown. You do not leave it. Standing with the gown for 2 hours. This is not what you imagined arriving in Paris when you thought about what a lady's maid's work consisted of. You thought about the dressing and the hair and the social proximity to a noblewoman's life, the reflected glamour of it, the education in a world that people from Rouen do not ordinarily enter. You did not think about standing in a garden in October for 2 hours, watching a piece of silk move very slightly in air that is cold enough to see your breath in, checking the sky at intervals, monitoring the quality of the light against the surface of the brocade, feeling the air on the back of your hands and deciding, Not wind, just movement. The gown is safe. The gown can stay. Your feet are cold. You have good wool stockings and you're wearing your thickest skirt, but the cold comes up from the flagstones through the soles of your boots with the persistence that cold has when it has decided to introduce itself. The silk moves. The brocade, which in the wardrobe room reads as a fixed surface, a pattern, a thing, moves in the garden air and becomes something else, becomes cloth, becomes light and weight and flex, becomes the thing it actually is, before it is arranged and pinned and fitted and presented. In the light out here, the silver thread does something different from what it does by candlelight. By candlelight it glitters. In the October morning light it glows, a warmer, steadier thing, less about spectacle and more about presence. You stand with it. At 8:30 the light shifts as the sun moves behind cloud, and you check the sky. Overcast, building from the west, the particular quality of cloud that might mean more rain by noon. You check the gown. The silk has been moving for 90 minutes. The slight movement working through the fibre in the way that airing is supposed to work, opening what the stored environment has closed, letting the wardrobe room's accumulated air out and the outside air in. Madame du Plessis appears at the garden door at 8:45. She looks at the sky, looks at the gown, looks at the sky again. "Bring it in," she says. "You bring it in." The gown, back in the wardrobe room, smells different. Barely. The difference is small, the kind of difference you'd miss if you weren't specifically attending to it. But the top note of the wardrobe room smell, the powder and the cedar and the long stored, has been displaced by something lighter, something that will fade in an hour back toward the ambient. But for this hour, the gown carries something of outside on it. "Good," Madame du Plessis says, and she puts the back of her hand against the surface of the silk, reading the temperature, reading whatever information the silk's surface temperature conveys to her that her long experience has taught her to read. 4 days. On the 4th day, the preliminary fitting happens. The fitting room has been warm since 4 in the morning. You lit the fire yourself before the wardrobe room, following the sequence Madame du Plessis established, warming the room so that by 8 o'clock when the Comtesse arrives, the air is at the temperature where the silk will fall correctly, and the Comtesse's body will be relaxed rather than contracted. The mirror in its gilded frame, the fitting platform, the gown, finished now with its lace, the full 8 meters of Point de France reattached with, by your count, approximately 1,280 stitches, of which Madame du Plessis made approximately 940, and you made 340, and of which roughly 300 of yours required reworking at least once, and about 80 of them twice, which she acknowledged without drama, and without any modification of the standard she expected from you the next day. The gown, on the padded form, in the fitting room's warm light, is... You look at it and feel something you don't have a full word for yet. It is the thing that all the work was in service of. The lace white and lying correctly against the silk, the hemline unbroken around the full circumference, the silver thread responding to the room's warmth in the particular way warm light differs from cold light on metal thread. The bodice, which you've been working on for 4 days with spirits of wine and with the careful adjustment of the side seam. A 3/8 adjustment, just as Madame du Plessis said. The boning channel absorbing the change invisibly, sits smooth and unbroken. The mark is gone, or not gone, changed. What was there is still there, in the sense that the molecules of it are still in the weave, but the mark as a visible thing as a thing the eye would find and register and take note of, is gone. What took its place is nothing. The smooth blue of the silk, the silver of the thread, the even fall of the brocade from the bodice into the skirt. The Comtesse arrives at 8:15. She comes in the morning robe, stays already on. You dressed her yourself this morning. The first time you've done the full morning dressing entirely on your own. Madame du Plessis watching from the doorway in a way that could be called supervision but felt more like witnessing. And she stops in the doorway of the fitting room and looks at the gown on its form. She looks at it for a moment. Her face does the thing it does, the thing you're still learning to read, the thing that isn't quite expressionless but isn't expressive either, the thing that is the public face in its private mode, the face she uses when she's looking at something that matters but that she hasn't yet decided how to respond to. "The lace," she says. "Yes, madame." "It's been cleaned." "It has, madame." "And the mark, the seam issue that du Plessis mentioned." "Addressed, madame." She crosses the room to the gown, and she does something she doesn't usually do in the wardrobe rooms. She brings her face close to the fabric, close enough that the candle Madame du Plessis is holding throws her shadow over the silk, and she looks at the bodice seam, at the place where the mark was, at the place that is now, to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking for, simply the gown. She straightens up. "Good," she says. And then, to Madame du Plessis, "Your new girl has good hands." Madame du Plessis says nothing, but you see in your peripheral vision the very slight adjustment of her posture, a millimetre, no more. That is for her the equivalent of a smile. The fitting itself takes 40 minutes. The gown goes on over the Comtesse's stays in the fitting room, the bodice pinned at the back, the skirt falling around the petticoat she's wearing, and Madame du Plessis walks around it twice before she touches anything. Then she begins. Small adjustments. The bodice has relaxed slightly across the back since its last wearing, the fabric having stretched marginally over the months of storage, and the adjustment needed is a matter of millimetres. But millimetres in this fabric at this cut are visible. And Madame du Plessis places a row of pins with the same absolute economy of motion as she uses for everything else. The Comtesse stands on the fitting platform and looks at herself in the mirror. You stand to the side and look at the same thing she's looking at, and the thing you're both looking at is the gown. Not the Comtesse in the gown. Not yet. Not without the hair and the powder and the accessories, all of which are absent, but the gown itself, and what it does to the space around the body it contains. The architecture of it, the way the bodice creates a line from shoulder to waist that is straight where the body underneath is curved, a geometric correction, a deliberate argument with anatomy. The way the skirt falls from that line in a shape that is controlled and specific, not the shape a skirt makes when it hangs freely from a waist, but the shape a skirt makes when it has been designed and cut and constructed by someone who has spent decades understanding what silk does when it's cut on this bias at this weight. The silver thread in the hem catches the fire's light and runs a line around the lower edge of the skirt, connecting the lace above it to the floor it's approaching, tying the whole structure together. It is not dirty. It is not clean by any standard you'll ever fully accept. It is wearable, maintained, ready. It is, in the language of this world, sufficient. 3 days until the reception. The 3 days are preparation and small corrections. Madame du Plessis' adjustment of the back bodice, the pins converted to stitches, the stitches pressed flat under a warm iron wrapped in several thicknesses of damp muslin, the heat applied with exact duration, Not long enough to damage the silk, but long enough to set the new line. The shoes coming back from the cobbler on Friday morning as promised, the heel leather resoled, the left toe panel resorked in the matched remnant silk, the difference between old and new silk visible only if you know and only under very specific light. You know. You check under the specific light. You decide the match is sufficient. The grey ribbons, the 3 options you brought to the Comtesse's sitting room on the 3rd morning, holding them against the blue of the gown in the existing light while she sat with her coffee, and made the judgment as took her 30 seconds and that you could not have made yourself. Not yet. The judgment of which grey exactly. Which shade of grey does what this gown needs? Which shade of grey works against the jet jewellery in the specific light of whatever the Domont house runs its reception in? Which she knows because she's been there 4 times and you haven't been there at all. The ribbon she chooses is a grey, so dark it's almost charcoal, a serious grey, a grey that makes the blue of the gown cooler and the silver thread brighter simultaneously. You bring it to Madame du Plessis, who examines it against the gown, tilts her head in a way you've learned means she's considering something she's not going to share aloud, and then nods. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, a smaller errand, a detail to be resolved with the seamstress who made the original gown 12 years ago, and whose memory for her own work is nearly perfect, who examines the adjusted seam for 30 seconds and says only that it won't show, using the word correctly, which in this world means it will not be visible to any observer who is not looking for it. Tuesday, the day before. Tuesday is the full preparation day. The gown comes off the form in the wardrobe room and onto the Comtesse, and the full dressing, the complete process, the one that will be repeated on Wednesday evening but that happens today as a final check, an assessment of the complete assembled picture. The full dressing takes 4 hours, including the hair. The hair takes most of that time. Madame du Plessis builds the hair in stages, each stage assessed in the mirror before the next is added. The height at the crown, achieved with pads, with pins, with the exact quantity of the Comtesse's own hair arranged over and around them. The width at the sides, slight, controlled. The fashion of this particular season not yet having reached the extreme architectures it will develop over the following decades. The powder applied over the finished arrangement, a dusting of white that settles into the dark hair and transforms it, the same powder that settles into the silk of the gown and onto the skin at the neck and the hands, making everything the same cool pallor, making the whole assembled figure one continuous surface rather than a body and its clothing. You stand to the side and watch Madame du Plessis work and hold things when you're told to hold things and pass things when you're told to pass them and stay invisible the rest of the time. The Comtesse, at the end of 4 hours, in the mirror, is the Comtesse de Villeneuve attending the Domont reception. She is the gown. She is the hair. She is the powder and the jet jewellery at her ears and throat. The crescent moon silk patch at her left eye's corner. The dark grey ribbon threaded through the dressed hair in 2 places, catching the light and releasing it. She is heeled 2.5 inches by the blue shoes with the replaced silk panel on the left toe. She has stays that push her posture into the correct aristocratic uprightness, that make her 6 years of dancing lessons and 15 years of being the Comtesse de Villeneuve in formal company read as something natural, something she was born with. She is not 31 and tired at 4 in the morning in the cold. She is someone else. Someone constructed, maintained, researched, assembled, and released into the social world of late Louis XIV Paris to do whatever it is people like her do at the Domont reception. She turns in the mirror. She examines herself with the same precise attention she brought to the bodice seam on fitting day. The same, not quite expressionless face. Reading. "The seam," she says. Madame du Plessis is already beside her, holding the candle to the correct angle. "Invisible," Madame du Plessis says. The Comtesse looks for another moment. "The lace." "Perfect," Madame du Plessis says. This is a different register from sufficient or manageable. Perfect. She uses it once every several months, Madame du Plessis, and she uses it correctly, the way a surgeon uses a specific term for a specific finding, because it is accurate, not because it's kind. The Comtesse's expression shifts. Something opens in it. Briefly. A breath's worth of something that might be relief, or satisfaction, or the very particular pleasure of knowing that the machine has worked, that the weeks of careful management has produced what they were supposed to produce, that she can walk into the Daumont reception tomorrow evening and be herself, the complete formal version of herself without compromise. "Thank you, du Plessis," she says. She looks at you. "And you, Marguerite." You say nothing. You nod. You're part of the machine, and the machine doesn't speak to receive credit. The machine simply works. Wednesday, the day of the reception. It begins the same as every day. Dark, cold, the wardrobe room at 5, the smells in their layers. But everything today has a different quality. The same actions, but weighted differently, loaded with the knowledge of where they are pointing. The dressing today begins at 4 in the afternoon, because the reception begins at 7, and the Comtesse needs to be in the carriage no later than 6:30, and the dressing, including the full hair, will take 2 hours minimum, and the carriage will need to be lined and checked, and the coachman briefed on the route, and the 2 footmen briefed on their duties at the Daumont house, which is across the city, which means you are going too. This is the part you didn't know until this morning, when Madame du Plessis told you with the same casualness as she tells you everything. You'll attend tonight. Attend. You'll travel with the Comtesse and wait in the servants' area of the Daumont house. If she needs anything during the evening, a pin, a repair, any attention to the gown, she'll send for you. What do I bring? Everything that can be needed. She turns and begins listing, and you listen and remember. A small kit, a selection of pins in various sizes, a few inches of the thread used in the hem resetting in case a stitch fails, the spirits of wine in a small bottle, the finest muslin cloth folded twice, one of the soft brushes, extra powder in a small bag, one extra length of the dark grey ribbon in case the ones in the hair come loose, the needle threaded and knotted, ready. And if the stays need adjustment mid-evening, that's a more significant situation. There's a small room off the main corridor at the Daumont house, the 3rd door on the left from the main reception room, which has been used for exactly this purpose at every reception for the past 10 years. If the Comtesse needs to go there, she'll find a way to indicate it to you. You'll already know to be watching. How will I be watching if I'm in the servants' area? You won't always be in the servants' area, Madame du Plessis says. You'll be wherever you need to be while being nowhere that anyone with reason to notice you will notice you. This is the skill she's been teaching you for 23 days without naming it as a skill. The skill of placement, of being close without being seen, of occupying the edges of a room with a specific quality of invisibility that is not absence. You're there, you're physically present, but that is performed, maintained, chosen. The invisibility of someone who has decided that their presence in a space is purely functional and is expressing that decision through every small choice of posture, and position and direction of gaze. You've been learning it without knowing you were learning it. Tonight you'll use it. The dressing takes 2 hours and 12 minutes, you and Madame du Plessis working together now, which is different from being directed. You know the sequence, you know the steps, you know the Comtesse's preferences and resistances, and the exact 3 places where you're supposed to pause for her to breathe before continuing with the lacing. The work between you is quiet and almost choreographed. A form of collaboration that doesn't require speech because the speech happened during the 4 weeks of instruction and is now stored in the hands. The gown goes on at 5:45. The bodice smooths over the stays, the skirt falls, the hem touches the floor with exactly the right amount of train behind it, and Madame du Plessis makes 2 small adjustments to the pinning at the back, and then stands back. The Comtesse is in the mirror. The Comtesse in the mirror tonight, with the hair done and the powder settled and the jet at her ears, and the dark grey ribbon and the blue shoes and the particular light from the candles that Madame du Plessis always arranges in this room for the final assessment. This particular evening, with the reception an hour away and everything in its correct place, is better than yesterday's rehearsal. Better, because the purpose of yesterday was preparation, and the purpose of today is the thing itself. And the thing itself has a quality that the preparation can approach, but never quite reach. A quality of stakes, of reality, of genuine consequence. The Comtesse knows where she's going tonight. She's thinking, behind the assembled surface, about the room she'll enter and the women who will be there and what they'll be wearing and what the evening represents in the ongoing social arithmetic of her life. The thinking gives her face something that the fitting room rehearsal couldn't produce: presence. The carriage is ready, you say. She looks at herself for one more moment. Then she turns away from the mirror. The carriage is a closed vehicle, a berline, the enclosed body suspended on leather springs that were the height of carriage technology when they were installed 6 years ago. The interior is lined in a dark green wool, the seats cushioned, the windows glassed with the slightly wavy glass that lets in the last of the autumn evening light, but filters it into something softer than the street outside. Getting the Comtesse into the carriage without damaging the gown is a procedure that Madame du Plessis manages from the house steps. The skirt gathered, the train carefully managed, the gown's circumference negotiating the carriage door with the minimum possible contact between silk and any surface that is not the interior lining of the carriage itself. You stand below the step and manage the hem. Madame du Plessis hands the train through last and steps back. Then you get in. The carriage moves. Paris at 6 in the evening in October. The streets darkening early. The torches and lanterns of the various establishments beginning to assert themselves against the encroaching dark. The city's evening commerce beginning. The food sellers and the tavern signs and the link boys assembling at corners with their pitch torches, ready for the hours when the streets will belong to whoever has a light. The carriage rolls through the Marais, turns south, crosses the city toward the Faubourg Saint-Germain where the Daumont house is, and the Comtesse sits in the dim interior with her hands in her lap and her face wearing its going-out expression. Composed, alert, slightly ahead of itself, already in the room she's travelling toward. You sit across from her. You're careful not to make eye contact unless she initiates it. This is another piece of the education that has no lecture, no explicit instruction. You understood it from the way Madame du Plessis positions herself in relation to the Comtesse in various settings, the way the relationship has a constant spatial grammar that says, I am here, I am available, I am not intruding. The carriage rolls. The Comtesse's hands are folded in her lap, and in the rocking of the carriage, the springs absorbing the cobblestones but not entirely, the rhythm of the street finding its way through the leather and the wheels into the body of the vehicle. Her hands move very slightly. A small movement, rhythmic, the kind of thing you do without deciding to do it when your mind is somewhere else. She's thinking about the reception. You're thinking about the gown. The gown, at this moment, is doing what it was built to do, holding. The lace at the hem is taking the movement of the carriage without any of the 1280 stitches announcing themselves. The bodice is pressing against the stays, which are pressing against the Comtesse, and the pressure is the correct pressure. The stay lacing done this morning by your hands to the tension Madame Duplessis checked before the carriage was called. The silver thread in the brocade is picking up whatever light comes through the wavy glass of the carriage windows and sending it back in the way silver thread does, with a warmth that candlelight will amplify. The carriage stops. The Daumont house, larger than the Hôtel de Villeneuve. The gate opens to a courtyard lit by torches at 4 points around the perimeter, the warm light playing over the stone facade of the house, which is grander than the Marais houses, newer, built in the last decade, the architecture of a generation that has more money and fewer memories of when the architecture was about something other than display. The Comtesse is handed out of the carriage by the footman. The gown is managed on the step by you, and then she walks through the gate and through the entrance and into the house, and you are left with the carriage and the footman and the instruction. Third door on the left from the main reception room. The small room. Be there. The servants' entrance is around the side. You find it. The servants' area of the Daumont house is familiar in its logic and different in its specifics. Warmer than the Hôtel de Villeneuve's servant spaces, the Daumonts keep a better fire, and more crowded because every guest's attendants are here. A collection of ladies' maids and footmen and dressers from a dozen different households, all keeping themselves available in the way you're keeping yourself available, all occupying the edges of the evening with the particular quality of presence that is tuned to one person elsewhere in the house. You find a place near the door that leads to the main corridor. You settle into it. You are invisible. You can hear the reception happening. Not clearly. There are several rooms and several doors between you and the main salon. But as a quality of sound, a density of human voices in conversation, the particular hum of many people talking simultaneously in a large room, the occasional rise of laughter above the general level, the sound of musicians somewhere in the house playing something formal and continuous that provides a floor beneath the conversation rather than competing with it. An hour passes. You have your kit. You stand with your kit. You're ready for something you don't know the specific shape of yet, only that it will require you to move quickly and quietly, and to make your hands do what they need to do in whatever conditions the room provides. Another half hour, and then one of the Daumont footmen appears in the servants' area doorway and his eyes find you specifically, which means the message has been given a description to locate, and he says very quietly, "Third door." You move. The third door on the left from the main reception room is not labelled. It's a door the same height and weight as the others in the corridor, with the same handle, which is its own form of description. In a house built for display, the door that is designed not to be noticed is the one that is for use. You open it. Small room. A room that was probably once a waiting room or a secretary's room, now furnished with a lamp, a chair, a small table. The walls hung in a plain grey silk that is cheaper than anything in the reception rooms, which makes it also calmer. A room designed to be functional rather than impressive. A room that has no opinion about what happens in it. The Comtesse is inside. She's sitting in the chair, or rather perching on the edge of it. Perching because the gown's structure doesn't allow comfortable sitting, because it's compressed the skirt in ways that then have to be managed when you stand again. So formal dress in formal settings involves a specific style of sitting that is almost a form of not sitting, the body angled, the skirt managed, the appearance of rest without the reality of it. She looks at you when you come in. Her face is not the composed face from the carriage, the going out face. It's something more specific, something that is both controlled and communicating. Controlled because she is always controlled, communicating because she's chosen to be alone with you in this room, which means the communication is permitted. The busk, she says. The busk. The busk is the flat piece of wood or bone in her stays, ivory, that runs vertically through the front of the stay construction, the central piece that keeps the front panel rigid, that prevents the bodice front from buckling. In the stays you laced this morning, the busk was correctly positioned, centred, comfortable in its channel. The busk has shifted. You can see it. Barely, but you can see it. A very slight displacement in the line of the bodice front, a millimetre that reads to your 4 weeks of training as wrong, in the way that a stitch tensioned differently from the others reads as wrong. And if you can see it in this lamplight, you can feel it. She can feel it. A corner of the busk pressing at the wrong angle against the sternum for however long she's been in that room. This is not an emergency. Not medically. But it needs addressing. And addressing it means unlacing part of the back stays, repositioning the busk, relacing, and all of this while she's in the gown, in a room adjacent to a reception she needs to return to within minutes. How long? She asks. 5 minutes. She nods, stands, presents her back to you. You begin. Your hands, in the dim lamplight of the small grey room with the sound of the reception a corridor away, do what they've been trained to do. The gown's back opening, designed for exactly this kind of access, the hooks releasing in sequence downward to the lacing beneath, opens under your fingers with the practised ease of the same motion, repeated every morning for 23 days. The bodice relaxes. The stays beneath, still laced but releasing the pressure of the overgown, give slightly. The busk is accessible through the front opening of the stays. There's a small tab at the top that allows it to be shifted without fully unlacing. You reach carefully, and you find the tab, and you ease the busk back into its channel. The busk settles. The resistance that was wrong disappears. You feel it in your fingertips, the correct position, the rightness of it, the same quality of complete that you've been learning to find in the correctly tensioned lace stitch. You rehook the gown front. You check the line from below, then from the side, in the limited light of the lamp. The bodice front is smooth. The displacement is gone. Better? You ask. She breathes once fully, and you can tell from the quality of the breath, the way it goes all the way in without the busk interrupting it, that, yes. Better, she says. You check the back. The hooks all closed correctly. The skirt hanging from the bodice in the correct line. You run one hand lightly down the back seam, reading through the silk the alignment of everything beneath it. The gown is right. She is right. She turns to the small mirror on the table. The Dumont house has been here before. There is a mirror, and she looks at herself. What she sees is the Comtesse de Villeneuve attending the Dumont reception, fully assembled, the busk in its channel, the seam invisible, the lace at the hem correct. She looks for a moment. Then she touches the crescent moon patch at her eye with one fingertip. A tiny adjustment you wouldn't have known to make, but that she knows is necessary, and she moves toward the door. At the door she pauses. She doesn't turn around. She's already resuming the going out face, the face that exists in the reception rooms. "Thank you, Marguerite," she says. The same words as the fitting. But this time they mean something different. This time they mean, you were here. You were ready. The thing that was wrong became right, and no one else will know it was wrong, and the evening will continue, and the machine has worked. She goes back to the reception. The door closes. You stand in the small grey room for a moment. The sound of the reception, through the door and the corridor and the walls of the Domol house, is unchanged. The voices and the music and the particular quality of a room full of people engaged in the social arithmetic of their world. None of it audible as individual voices now, only as a collective frequency, a sound that says, "The evening is continuing. The evening is fine. The Comtesse de Villeneuve has returned to the room, and the room has not noticed she was absent. You put your kit away. You straighten the chair she sat in. You leave the room and close the door behind you, and walk back along the corridor to the servants' area, and find your place near the door and resume being invisible. 2 more hours of the evening. 2 hours in which nothing else requires you. No summons, no second visit to the grey room, nothing from the reception except its continuous ambient sound. At 9:15 the guests begin to leave. Carriages are called. The servants' area mobilizes, each attendant moving back toward the household they came from, finding the coats and the cloaks and the overshoes that belong to their mistress, assembling at the relevant exit. You find the Comtesse in the entrance hall. She's talking to another woman, someone you don't know, someone whose own lady's maid is standing 2 steps behind her in the same invisible stance you're occupying. And the conversation has the quality of pleasantries concluding, of an evening being wrapped up with the social formulas that serve as its final punctuation. The other woman's gown is blue, a different blue, darker, heavier, a damask rather than a brocade, but blue. And as the 2 women stand together in the entrance hall's candlelight, making their conclusion, the gowns are in proximity and the eye moves between them involuntarily, making the comparison that the social world always makes when 2 formal gowns occupy the same candlelit space. The other woman's gown is newer. You can tell, not easily, and maybe only because you've spent 4 days very close to a gown that isn't new, learning what not new looks like. You can tell that the other gown has been worn perhaps twice. The lace at its hem is white in the specific way of unwashed white, the brightness that comes only before contact with floors, and the silk has the surface that silk has when it hasn't yet been broken in by the body beneath it, a slight excess of structure, a rigidity that will relax over wearings. The Comtesse's gown, by contrast, has 6 wearings in its fabric. 6 evenings of the Comtesse's life, carried in the weave and managed with 4 days of careful work and cold water and spirits of wine and 1,280 stitches. From across the room, from where the other woman is standing, from where the other woman's lady's maid is standing, from where any guest at this reception is standing, the 2 gowns are simply 2 blue gowns, both fine, both formal, both indicating the appropriate level of expense and care. Only you know what it took. The social conversation concludes. The women separate. The Comtesse moves toward the door and you move with her, carrying the cloak and the overshoes and the small case of things she'll need in the carriage. And the footman opens the door and you step out into the Paris night. Cold. The full October cold, unmediated now by any enclosed space, hitting the face with the directness of air that has come a long way over dark fields and doesn't care what it finds when it arrives. The torches in the courtyard throw their unsteady light over the cobbles and the waiting carriages. The coachman is already on his box. You hand in the gown. You manage the train. You get in. The carriage moves. The Comtesse in the carriage in the dark is quiet for most of the return journey. Not the pre-reception quiet of someone thinking ahead, but a different quiet. The quiet of someone who has finished something and is letting it settle, who is returning from the constructed world back toward the private world, who is already beginning the process of becoming the woman in the firelight at 4 a.m, rather than the person who just spent 3 hours in the Daumont reception rooms. The Duchesse Daumont said the lace was exquisite, she says, halfway home. You wait. She asked who my modiste was. A pause. She was looking at the lace specifically. Another pause. I told her the lace was old. I said it was my mother's. You say nothing. The carriage rolls. It was not my mother's, she says, but you already know this, and she knows you know this, and the statement exists not as information but as something else, an acknowledgement of the particular fiction that the two of you share, that you maintain together. That is the real product of the work. At the Hôtel de Villeneuve, Madame Duplessis is waiting. She does not ask how the evening went. She asks, the gown? The busk shifted, you say, addressed in the small room, otherwise no issues. She nods. She takes the gown from you and begins the undressing, with the efficiency of someone for whom the end of an evening is simply the beginning of the next stage of work. The gown assessed, any damage from the evening noted in the ledger, the correct storage arrangements made, the cedar placed, the linen wrapping applied, the parcel returned to its shelf. She works in the candlelight of the wardrobe room while you hold the candelabra. After a time, she says, without looking up, the Duchesse d'Aumont commented on the lace. You look at her. The Comtesse told me in her chambers just now, Madame Duplessis says. She continues working the linen wrapping. The Duchesse asked who made it. She said it was her mother's. Yes. Madame Duplessis smooths the last fold of linen over the gown and ties the ribbon. Her hands in the candlelight are very still for a moment. Then she picks up the parcel and carries it to the locked room. Correct answer. She places the parcel on its shelf. The shelf with the ribbon-coded system. The ribbon now updated with the small paper tag she's added, indicating tonight's wearing. The 6th, the one that closed the season for this gown, the one that produced the Duchesse d'Aumont's compliment. She closes the locked room door. You did good work, she says. Not sufficient. Not better. Good work. You stand in the wardrobe room you work out the time from the church bells that rang while you were in the carriage, at somewhere past 10 in the evening, holding a candelabra, in a room that smells of cedar and powder and the faint, still-present breath of the spirits of wine, with the sounds of Paris audible through the window in their nighttime register. You think about the small grey room, about the busk in its channel, about the 1,280 stitches and the 5 applications of spirits of wine, and the 2 hours in the garden in October, and the cobbler on the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois, and the fripiers. Careful silence and the paper packet of remnant silk that waited 2 years on a shelf for a single use. About the Duchesse d'Aumont looking at the lace. About the Comtesse in the carriage saying, I told her it was my mother's. About all the things that must exist and must be invisible simultaneously, and the people whose entire working lives are spent making sure the existence and the invisibility coexist without contradiction. You go upstairs. Your room is the same as it was this morning. The cot, the hook for the dress, the window onto the well shaft. You sit on the cot and take off your shoes and your stockings, and you look at your feet, which are cold, which have been cold since the garden 2 mornings ago, it seems, in the particular way that October cold settles into the bones and doesn't leave. The church bells somewhere nearby strike 11. Outside the window, Paris continues. It always continues. The well shaft outside the window is dark. Of course it is. It's always dark down there, the light reaching the bottom for perhaps an hour at high summer noon, otherwise just the wet stone walls and the rope and the smell of algae rising. But at this hour the darkness has a different quality. The darkness of a thing that has stopped even trying, that has accepted the night and let itself into it fully. You sit on the cot. Your feet are on the floor. The church bell that just struck 11 is still ringing in the air somewhere above the rooftops, the sound decaying slowly, each reverberation a fraction less than the one before, until there's nothing left of it but the idea of it. The silence that remembers it was once a bell. You think about the gown. You think about the lace specifically, the 8 meters of it, the 1,280 stitches, the cold water and the muslin cloth, and the pin that Madame Duplessis moved through the raised motifs of the Pointe de France, with the patience of someone for whom patience is not a virtue so much as a professional condition, the same way a stone is a professional condition for a mason. You think about the first stitch you made and the wrong tension and the instruction to feel rather than see. You think about the 4 stitches that needed reworking, and the 140 of your stitches that held correctly through the whole evening, through 6 hours of formal dress and a carriage ride, and 3 hours in the Daumont reception rooms and another carriage ride home, held correctly and invisibly, doing their work without announcing themselves. You think about the busk shifting in its channel, the 5 minutes in the small grey room, your hands doing what they've been trained to do in dim lamplight, quickly, correctly, and then the sound of her breathing when the busk was right again, the full breath, the one that had been interrupted for however long before she found the way to signal for you. You'd been watching. You'd been watching from the servants' area through the doorway into the corridor, in the invisible way you're learning, and when the footman appeared with the description that was you were already moving, already almost at the 3rd door before he finished pointing. She needed you, and you were there. This seems simple. It isn't. Being in the right place at the right moment, in a house that isn't yours, in an evening you're attending in a role that doesn't officially exist, not the Comtesse's lady's maid in the reception, not a guest, not a servant of the Daumont house, nothing that the social grammar of the evening has a category for, requires a kind of knowledge that isn't taught in any instruction. It requires you to have internalized the structure of the evening well enough to predict it, to know where the Comtesse will be at what hour and what she'll need, and where the small grey room is relative to the main salon, to carry in your body the map of a space you've never entered before and navigate it as though you have. You carried it. You got there in time, and the Duchesse d'Aumont looked at the lace and said it was exquisite. You lie back on the cot. The straw mattress, which seemed impossibly uncomfortable when you arrived from Rouen 23 days ago. 23 days, which is a fact that seems both true and impossible, because you have lived here in this slot of a room for 23 days, and you feel like you have lived here for much longer, because the days here are dense, each one packed with more information than the days in Rouen contained, more to learn, more to lose. The straw mattress has shaped itself to you over those 23 days in the small, specific ways that straw shapes itself to a body. a slight accommodation in the places where you habitually lie, a giving in. The ceiling above you is the underside of the roof. In the warmer months, the roof probably radiates heat downward into this room. In December and January, it will radiate cold. You'll deal with that when it comes. Tonight, there's a frost beginning. You can hear it, in the way that cold air changes the quality of sound. The Paris sounds from outside sharpening slightly, becoming more distinct, the edges of the noise more present. The carriage sounds crisper. The bell that struck 11 sounded different from the bell that strikes at noon. The cold doing something to the brass. You close your eyes. You're not asleep. But the gap between where you are and sleep is smaller than it has been tonight, and the events of the evening are beginning to lose their forward edge and become something softer, something more retrospective, something you can hold rather than something holding you. The Comtesse saying, "I told her it was my mother's, not her mother's," a statement that is technically untrue and socially essential and in some sense entirely correct. The lace has been in the house for 12 years, which in the life of lace is a kind of maturity, a kind of lineage, a kind of truth that isn't genealogical but is real. The lace has earned, through 12 years of care and crisis and cold water and muslin cloth and whatever happened to the previous 6 wearings that you didn't witness, something that belongs to the family whether or not the family made it. The Comtesse said, "My mother's," and the Duchesse d'Aumont believed her, or chose to believe her, or perform the believing of her, which in that world is functionally identical. This is what you've been learning. Not just how to handle the Point de France or remove a perspiration mark from silk or manage a bisque in a small room in 5 minutes. You've been learning the larger thing that all the smaller things are part of. The grammar of a world that is entirely constructed, that runs on performed realities, that requires everyone in it to maintain simultaneously the construction and the knowledge that it is constructed, and to never, not once, not in front of anyone with the power to damage the construction, acknowledge the gap between them. The Comtesse knows her gown has been worn 6 times. The Comtesse knows the lace is 12 years old and was cleaned in a basin in the wardrobe room 4 days ago. The Comtesse knows the perspiration mark at the bodice seam, which is better but not gone, which lives now in the millimetre zone between visible and invisible. She knows all of it. She dressed in it anyway. She stood in the d'Aumont reception rooms in it for 3 hours and spoke to the Duchesse d'Aumont about the lace with the face of someone who has never thought about lace in the worrying way. This is the work, not the stitches, not the spirits of wine. The stitches and the spirits of wine are in service of the real work, which is maintaining the surface, making it possible for the performance to continue, making the gap invisible so that everyone on both sides of it can go on. You, invisible in the servants' area, were on both sides simultaneously. You knew what the gown contained. You also made it possible for the gown to be what it appeared to be. Both things at once. This is the job. You fall asleep somewhere in this thought. Not a clean falling asleep, not the sudden disappearance of consciousness, but a slow permeation, the way ink spreads in water, gradually, without a precise moment of transition. Thinking, becoming dreaming, becoming the same quality of darkness as the well shaft outside the window. The bells somewhere strike midnight. You don't hear them. Winter comes. It comes the way Paris winter comes, without drama, without a specific first day, as an accumulation of conditions that gradually tips from autumn into something harder. The frosts that started in October become the frozen basin water in November. The basin water that was merely cold becomes water you break with your fist before you can wash your face. A sharp crack through the surface ice that leaves your knuckles aching for an hour afterward. The fire in your room, which was not lit in October, is lit 3 times a week in November. Not enough, but something. A concession from the household's coal budget that Madame du Plessis apparently negotiated at some previous point for the wardrobe room staff. Because the wardrobe room and the cold are not compatible. Because cold affects how fabric behaves, and cold hands make mistakes. You don't make mistakes. Not the kind you made in your first weeks anyway. The tension errors in the lace setting. The slightly wrong pressure with the spirits of wine cloth, the time you misjudged the weight of a petticoat and let the hem contact the floor while moving it between rooms, resulting in a 1/4 inch of contact with a floor that was cleaner than most but still a floor, resulting in Madame du Plessis' stillest and most informative silence. You make different mistakes now, smaller ones, more interesting ones, in the sense that they reveal things about the work that you hadn't understood, rather than revealing things about basic technique that you should already know. The interesting mistakes are the ones you learn from. Madame du Plessis never says this. She corrects and moves on, but you feel the difference in the way she presents the correction, the flatness of it, the absence of the particular weight she puts on corrections that are about carelessness rather than ignorance. Carelessness gets a silence. Ignorance gets a demonstration. The distinction is consistently made, and you have been moved, over the months, mostly from the silence category to the demonstration category, which is progress of a kind that doesn't come with an announcement. December. The reception season reaches its height in December, because December is when the court returns from Versailles for the winter, because December is when the social obligations of the aristocracy are at their most concentrated, because December is expensive and cold and the best part of the year for everyone who makes a living providing what the reception season requires. The gowns go out and come back in. You track them in the ledger now. Madame du Plessis showed you the ledger system in November, sat you down with a leather-bound book and walked you through the notation system, the codes for occasion and duration and condition, the system of damage notation that allows you to find any garment's complete history in under a minute. You make the entries now after each wearing, in the handwriting that Madame du Plessis has approved, the same hand she uses, the same abbreviations, the same spare notation that contains everything necessary and nothing extra. The blue gown goes out twice more in December. The second wearing, the perspiration mark at the bodice seam, which had retreated to near invisibility after the spirits of wine treatment, advances slightly. You note it in the ledger. You discuss with Madame du Plessis. The decision. The gown is retired from this season. It will rest through January and be assessed in February, when the question of the side seam adjustment will be revisited. The green brocade goes out once, the burgundy silk 4 times. A new gown arrives from the modiste in the second week of December, a cream silk for the holiday season, so pale it's almost white, with silver embroidery that takes its first wearing in the light of dozens of candles and acquires, by the end of that evening, the faint first marks that are its own beginning. The cream silk's first wearing is logged in the ledger. The cream silk has, at the moment of its first logging, approximately 60 to 70 wearings ahead of it, before it reaches the condition the blue gown is in now. 60 to 70 evenings, perhaps 8 to 10 years. You will be part of most of them. This thought arrives one morning in December while you're brushing the surface of the cream silk after its second wearing. and it sits with you in the wardrobe room with the particular weight of a thought that's about time. 8 to 10 years. You're 16. In 8 to 10 years, you'll be 24 or 26. The cream silk will be ready for the wardrobe room's secondary shelf, where it will wait in linen wrapping with its ribbon tag until it goes out again or doesn't. And you will be, what? A first lady's maid if things go well. A wardrobe keeper, possibly, if things go very well. The person who holds the ledger, who makes the decisions about the spirits of wine treatment and the seam adjustment, who teaches someone new how to feel for the correct tension rather than see it. Madame du Plessis, 50 years younger. This isn't a frightening thought. It's, in the specific atmosphere of the wardrobe room at 6 a.m. in December, with the frost on the window and the smell of cedar and powder, an almost comforting one. January. The season quiets. The court goes back to Versailles. The reception rooms go dark. The Comtesse spends January in her chambers receiving a small number of visitors, corresponding, managing the affairs of the household in the way that household affairs require management, which is constant and complex and mostly invisible to you because it happens in rooms you don't enter. January in the wardrobe room is maintenance. The gowns from the season are assessed, treated, repaired, stored. Madame du Plessis moves through them with the systematic thoroughness of an inventory, which is what it effectively is. The state of the wardrobe after the season, the decisions about what can be worn again and what needs more significant attention, and what is finally at the end of its useful life in this household. One gown reaches this point in January, a rose silk, 10 years old, that has been in the secondary room since the Comtesse was 21, and that was worn 12 times in its active season and 17 times since, across 9 years of occasional use. Madame du Plessis takes it out of its linen wrapping in the first week of January and places it on the work table and stands over it with the candle for a long time. You stand on the other side of the table. The rose silk at rest is still beautiful. The colour has deepened slightly over 10 years, not faded as you might expect, but deepened. The rose going a shade towards something richer. The silk having developed a quality that new silk doesn't have, a depth that comes only from time. But the bodice is marked in ways that no treatment will fully address. The perspiration accumulation at the underarms has set into the silk in the permanent way, the way that happens when the garment is many years old and has been worn through many seasons, and the fabric has absorbed as much as it can absorb and can no longer be persuaded to release it. The hem is worn in 2 places where the train has contact with the floor at a particular angle during a particular kind of movement. The lace at the cuffs, a different lace from the point de France at the hem, a Mechlin lace in a floral pattern, has 3 small repairs in it where it had been caught and torn and carefully re-knitted. The repairs invisible unless you're looking for them, but visible if you are. Madame du Plessis stands over it. She reaches out and touches the worn hem section with her fingertip. Just the one touch. Then she straightens up and wraps the gown back in its linen, and ties the ribbon and sets it aside, in a different place from the other stored garments. The Comtesse will make a decision about the rose silk, she says. Can it be repaired? It can be repaired. The question is whether it's worth repairing. She picks up the next gown. There are 3 options for a garment that has reached this point. It is repaired and returned to service. It is retired to the storage room permanently, kept but not worn, or it enters the secondary market. The fripiers, or it goes to the seamsters as material. The silk is still good quality. The worst sections of the bodice can be cut away. What remains can be used for facings, for inserts, for backing other garments. Nothing is wasted. And the lace from the cuffs? The lace goes back into circulation. Good Mechlin lace has 20, 30 more years of useful life in it if it's maintained. It will be sold separately. She opens the next parcel. The fripier on the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois keeps a contact for Mechlin. She'll take the lace. The same fripier, the one with the careful eyes and the careful silence about provenance, the circle of it. The gown comes in from the modiste, passes through years of wearing and maintenance, reaches the end of its life in this household, and its components disperse. The silk to a seamstress, the lace to the fripier's contact, and from there to someone else's wardrobe, where the same cycle begins again in a different household, with a different ledger, a different woman's hands managing the treatment and the repairs, and the cold water in the basin. Nothing is wasted. February. The cold is at its most serious. The basin water every morning. The coal for the wardrobe room fire extended to 5 days a week, because Madame Duplessis has convinced someone, you don't know who, the coal is simply there, that the extended warmth is necessary for fabric preservation. You suspect this argument is accurate and also convenient, and that Madame Duplessis would agree with both assessments. In February you go on the roof. This is not an assigned task and not precisely a sanctioned one. You go to the roof because you're carrying linens to the roof storage area. The highest floor of the hotel has a storage room for summer linens and certain items that benefit from the air circulation up there. And the door to the roof access is next to the storage room door, and the roof access door is unlocked. You open it. The cold hits you immediately and completely, not the indoor cold of the wardrobe room in the morning, which is mitigated by walls and floors and the presence of the household beneath. This is outdoor cold, February cold, air that has come from somewhere north of Paris and hasn't been moderated by anything human-made since it left there. You stand in it for a moment, then you go up. The roof of the Hôtel de Villeneuve is flat, with a low parapet running round the edge, lead-covered, the lead grey and dull in the February morning light. Roof chimneys rise from it at intervals, 6, 8 of them, the exits of the household's various fires, and from 4 of them thin trails of smoke rising, which means the kitchen fire is going, and the main reception room fire, and the Comtesse's chamber fire, and one other, somewhere below, and from the parapet in every direction. Paris. You've never been this high before. Not here, not anywhere in the city. The streets below are too enclosed, the buildings too packed together for any real sense of scale. You walk through Paris and you see the immediate metre or two of street ahead, and the walls on either side, and occasionally a gap that offers you a slice of courtyard or a glimpse of sky. But the city as a thing, as a whole thing, has been invisible from within it, the way a forest is invisible when you're inside it. From the roof, it's not invisible. Paris is visible. It spreads in every direction to a distance that, on a clear morning in February with no summer haze and the cold air making everything sharp, is remarkable. The rooftops of the Marais below and around you, the leaden tile and chimney forest, and beyond that, farther south, where the Seine cuts through, the towers of Notre Dame, which you know from the street level as the end of the Ile de la Cité, which you've never seen from above before, rising above the surrounding buildings with the confidence of something that has been rising above the surrounding buildings for 4.5 centuries and fully expects to continue doing so. To the west, where the city thins and then thickens again, the Tuileries, and behind them the beginning of the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, the new rich quartiers where the next generation of hôtels particuliers is being built. To the south, the left bank and the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and somewhere in that direction, invisible from here but present in your understanding of the city's geography, the Daumont house with its small grey room and its mirror and its third door on the left from the reception. The smoke from the chimneys rises over everything. Not just from this roof, but from 10,000 roofs. The smoke of the city's morning fires, the kitchen fires and the reception room fires, and the wardrobe room fires. The fires of the workshops and the bakeries and the foundries in the eastern quarters, all rising together into the February air and diffusing and creating a particular quality of light above Paris that you've seen from the street as a dimness, as a winter sky that never quite gets bright, and which from up here reveals itself as people. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, all simultaneously engaged in the ordinary work of staying alive, all requiring heat, all producing smoke, the smoke of 500,000 people's fires hanging over their heads. You stand at the parapet and look south toward where the Seine is, though you can't see it from here hidden in its valley. You think about the gown, not specifically the blue gown. The blue gown is in the secondary room now, wrapped in linen, waiting for spring. The gown in the general sense, the thing you're becoming a keeper of, the object that connects, in a way you're still working out the full extent of, all of these rooftops and all of this smoke and all of these lives to each other. These silk weavers in Lyon who made the brocade, their chimney smoke is rising over Lyon right now probably, in the same February morning. The whale whose bones are in the stays, somewhere off Iceland or Greenland, the whale hunting ships are somewhere. The women in Alençon making the next generation of Pointe de France, the next 1,200 stitches that will end up on some future gown, that some future lady's maid will spend 4 days preparing for a reception that hasn't happened yet. Their smoke is rising over Alençon, and here, this smoke, these chimneys, this city, the silk is here, the gown is here, the Comtesse is here, and you are here, on the roof, in February cold, looking at it all. A piece of the machine, a necessary piece, not visible from below, not visible from the reception rooms, not visible in the same way that the stitches in the hem are not visible. Present, essential, invisible. You stay on the roof for 15 minutes. Then you go back down because Madame Duplessis expects you in the wardrobe room by 8, and some forms of perspective are bought at the cost of other forms of precision, and you are learning which is which. March. The Comtess's sister comes to visit from Burgundy, bringing 2 daughters of marriageable age and a wardrobe question that consumes the wardrobe room for 9 days. The daughters need to be clothed for a presentation season in Paris, and the sister, a smaller, darker version of the Comtesse, with the same economy of expression and a different relationship to the formal world, less polished, more provincial, wearing it on her face in the way that you wore it on yours when you arrived. The sister has strong opinions about what the daughter should wear, and limited knowledge of what's available and at what cost. Madame Duplessis handles this with a diplomatic precision that you watch carefully, because the diplomacy is itself a form of skill, separate from the garment skills but equally demanding. She listens to the sister's opinions with the same full attention she gives to a problematic seam. She agrees with the things that can be agreed with. She redirects the things that cannot, not by contradicting but by presenting alternatives, by showing something that addresses the same desire from a more feasible direction. You observe. At one point the sister asks to see the secondary wardrobe room. Madame Duplessis declines, gently but with the completeness of a closed door, and the sister accepts this without quite knowing why she accepted it, which is the point. Some rooms are not for visitors. You're watching, Madame Duplessis says to you later when the sister is occupied elsewhere in the house. I'm learning, you say. What are you learning? You think about it. That the work is larger than the garments. She looks at you for a moment. Larger than the garments, she repeats, with the quality that means she's assessing the accuracy of the statement. Then, yes. And then she picks up her needle and goes back to the hem she's been working on, and the conversation closes. But she remembers. A week later, she begins teaching you the other part, the diplomacy, the navigation of the household's social geography, who reports to whom, which decisions belong to you and which to her and which to the Comtesse directly, how to communicate with the Modesties workshop, how to negotiate with suppliers in the way that a lady's maid negotiates, which is different from the way a man of business negotiates, which is different from the way a tradesman negotiates, because your leverage is different, your relationships are different, what you can offer and what you cannot offer are different. She teaches you who to speak to directly and who must always be approached through her. She teaches you which of the household's other staff are allies and which are neutral and which are something to navigate around carefully, not because they're enemies, but because their interests and yours are not always the same. She teaches you the ledger more completely, not just the notation, but the reasoning behind the notation, the specific form of institutional memory that the ledger represents, the fact that in a serious household, the wardrobe keeper's death or departure creates an administrative crisis that can take years to recover from, and that the ledger is designed to survive that crisis, to be readable by whoever comes next. You'll keep it, she says one morning in March, sliding the ledger across the work table to your side. You look at it. Keep it fully, she adds, not just entries after wearings, all of it. Acquisition notes, treatment records, condition assessments. Everything that's in my head goes in the ledger from now on because my head is not permanent. Are you start. I'm not going anywhere immediately. A slight pause. But I've been doing this work for 20 years and I've never properly trained a successor. That was a mistake. I'm correcting it. She looks at you with the full weight of her attention, which is the heaviest thing in the wardrobe room. You have better hands than I did at your age. You learn faster. You keep things in your head accurately. These are the right qualities. Another pause. You also have a tendency to stand on rooftops in February, which is not a quality I'd have expected to consider relevant, but I think it might be. You feel something in your face do something you can't fully control. You saw that. I see most things that happen in this household. She takes the ledger back, opens it to the current page, adds the day's entry with her spare precise handwriting. Looking at the city from above is not a weakness. Understanding that you're part of a larger system is useful. Knowing when to come back down is essential. She slides the ledger back to you. Your entry. You take up the pen. You write the entry. The spring comes. The reception season winds into its quieter phase. The court returns to Versailles with the warmer weather, and Paris empties of the particular density of titled presents that winter concentrates into it, and the streets, and the wardrobe rooms, and the social arithmetic all shift into a slower register. The cream silk from December goes out twice in April, at 2 smaller private suppers, and comes back each time with its first season's accumulation settling into the weave. You treat it after the second wearing, a careful first spirits of wine application to the bodice seam area, and you feel in the silk under your fingertips the beginning of what will, over years, become its character. The way the weave has already begun to soften in the high contact areas, the way the silver thread lies slightly differently in the places where it's been moved against. The cream silk is learning what it is. May. The Comtesse asks in May whether you can dress her hair in the mornings without Madame du Plessis present. She asks you directly in the bedchamber during the morning routine, in the particular tone she uses for questions that are already decisions. You say yes. The first morning you do it alone. The hair takes 7 minutes longer than it takes Madame du Plessis. The second morning, 4 minutes longer. The third morning, 1 minute longer. The fourth morning, exactly the right amount of time. Madame du Plessis, when you tell her this, says nothing. But she records something in the household book she keeps separately from the wardrobe ledger, the one you haven't been fully shown yet, the one that presumably contains the institution's own memory of its people. June. The summer smell of Paris arrives. You've been told about it. You weren't prepared for it. The Seine going low and warm, the gutters going warm, the particular compound that 400,000 people produce when the temperature rises above something the body can manage and stays there, rising from the stone streets and the river and the air itself. The wardrobe rooms must be kept cool. The gowns must be kept away from the heat, because heat does to silk what light does to silk in a different way. Not bleaching, but aging, accelerating the slow deterioration that is always happening in the fibres, making a 10-year gown into a 15-year gown without the 10 intervening years. The windows are managed carefully. The fires are out entirely. The cool air of early morning is admitted, and then the windows closed against the afternoon heat. You learn to work in the early hours before the heat arrives. You learn to live in the particular early morning Paris of midsummer, which is extraordinary. The city before the heat, the air still carrying the night's coolness, the light coming over the rooftops at an angle that makes the chimneys and the roof lines into a kind of geometry. A city made of lines before the heat arrives and makes everything soft and indistinct. A year passes, not all at once, not as a single unit of time, as the accumulation of the days and the mornings and the church bells and the wardrobe room and the ledger and the stitches and the cold water and the warm fire and the coat you need and the coat you don't need, day by day by day, until there have been enough of them that the word year seems like the right container for them, the right shape. You are 17. You are not the girl who arrived from Rouen with a letter of introduction and no idea what she was walking into. You're not a woman yet in the sense the world means. Not finished, not settled, not arrived anywhere particular. But you're not that girl. The girl who stood in the secondary wardrobe room and stared at 72 garments with her mouth open, who wrote wrong stitches and corrected them and wrote better ones, who stood on the roof in February and let Paris be large for 15 minutes before coming back down. You're someone in the middle of becoming something. The wardrobe room at the end of a long day in early autumn in the second year smells the same as it smelled on your first morning. Cedar and powder and the stored silk, and underneath everything the old stone smell of the house's 80 years. The candles on the work table throw the same shadows. The ledger lies open at today's entry, which is in your handwriting, which is now, Madame du Plessis has told you without quite complimenting you, adequate. Adequate. The middle register. You're working towards sufficient. You put down the pen, you cover the ledger, you blow out all but one candle, the last one for the walk to your room, for the transit through the dark corridor to the dark stairway to the door of your dark room. Outside the wardrobe room window, Paris is doing what Paris always does at this hour, not stopping. The tavern sounds and the distant music and the carriage that just turned into a nearby street, with the sound of hooves on cobble that you can now identify by horse, single horse, trotting, so a light vehicle, so probably a private carriage or a cabriolet. You've learned to hear the city differently than you did when you arrived. You take the candle. You walk through the dark house to the dark room. Your room. The cot. The hook. The window onto the well shaft. The well shaft that smells of algae and old rope, and that is dark. Always dark, the light reaching the bottom for perhaps an hour at midsummer noon. But that is also, in the specific way that familiar things become familiar, yours. The particular quality of darkness in this well shaft. The particular sound the rope makes when the wind comes through from the street and finds the opening at the top. You've learned to sleep with it. You set the candle down on the floor beside the cot and sit on the edge of the mattress. The straw has shaped itself to you over a year. The cold of October is beginning again. The floor cold, the window cold, the quality of the air changing back toward the season. It was when you arrived, the frost beginning to announce itself in the quality of the dark. You've been here a year. Tomorrow will be another morning. The wardrobe room at 5, the candelabra. Whatever the day brings, and the day always brings something, because a household is a living thing, and living things produce events at rates that outpace any preparation. Whatever it brings, your hands will know what to do, not always perfectly, not yet, but correctly, increasingly, with the correctness of someone who has made enough mistakes that the mistakes have become information rather than failures. You blow out the candle, the room goes dark, the well shaft dark. The October cold comes through the window at the edge of the sill, very faint, just enough to feel it against the side of your face as you lie down. Paris is out there. You can hear it. Not loudly, not tonight. Tonight is quiet by Paris standards. The sound reduced to its nighttime frequency, the moderate hum of a city that has stopped shouting and is merely breathing. Somewhere a bell strikes. You count automatically. 9. Not late. The household won't be fully quiet for another hour yet. The kitchen staff still moving. The footman still attending the Comtesse's evening reading. The lower maids finishing whatever they finish last. But this room is quiet. This room is the quietest room in the house, tucked up here in its slot. The well shaft swallowing sound rather than transmitting it. The walls of the house between you and the street, adequate to reduce Paris to a suggestion rather than a statement. You let the suggestion of it be there. It's there every night. You've stopped trying to separate it into its components. It's just the city now, just the background condition of being in this place. The same way the smell of the wardrobe room is the background condition of the working hours and the cold floor is the background condition of early morning. Paris, breathing. You, breathing. The straw mattress under your back. The thin blanket over you. The ceiling above you that is the underside of the roof, and that carries, if you could read it, the evidence of 80 winters. You think, in the slow way that thoughts move when the body is heavy with tiredness, about the things you know now that you didn't know a year ago. You know the weight of 8 meters of Pointe de France lace in your hands, the exact tension required to attach it to silk without pulling either element. You know the smell of spirits of wine and how it changes when it has lifted something from a weave versus when it's done everything it can do. You know the sound the busk makes when it settles correctly into its channel. Not a sound exactly, more of an absence of resistance, a rightness you feel through the fabric before you hear anything at all. You know the feel of February cold on the roof and the look of Paris from above, the smoke of 500,000 fires, the towers of Notre Dame. You know the third door on the left from the main reception room and the quality of the mirror there, and the light of the lamp at a specific angle on a specific shade of blue silk. You know the ledger, the ribbon codes, the notation system, the history of 72 garments, each one of which has its own story, its own accumulation, its own evidence of the years it's been in contact with a human life. You know what the Comtesse's face looks like at 4 in the morning before the day's architecture goes on, and you know what it looks like when the architecture is complete, and you know the distance between those two faces, and you know that you are the person who builds the bridge between them every morning and dismantles it again every evening. You know that the gown is not clean. You know that this is not the point. The point is, the gown is ready. The point is, the lace is correct. The point is, the Duchesse de Mont said exquisite, and the Comtesse de Villeneuve's evening continued, and the work was invisible and the machine ran. That's the work. That's all the work. Your eyes are heavy. The thought that was thinking itself starts to lose its forward edge, starts to become something more ambient, more like the sound of Paris than like a thought. There but not quite there, present but not requiring attention. You've earned this. Not this specifically, not this room, not this cot. Earned seems like the wrong word for a space this small and this cold, but the rest. The particular quality of rest that comes when the body has been used fully and correctly, and the hands know what they did today was right, when the day's record in the ledger is accurate and the gown is wrapped correctly, and the busk is in its channel, and the lace held through everything you asked of it. That kind of rest, that kind of enough. You are warm enough. The blanket is thin, but the straw holds some heat, and the walls hold some heat, and the body holds its own, and you are warm enough for sleep. Fed enough. Supper was soup and bread, and a piece of cheese from the kitchen, eaten standing at the kitchen table with Bertrand, who is less nervous now than she was in October, who laughs occasionally at things you say, which is its own kind of evidence that time has passed and left something behind. Safe enough. The gate is locked. The concierge is at his post. The walls of the Hôtel de Villeneuve are doing what walls are for. Warm enough. Fed enough. Safe enough. You have a roof. You have work that is making you into something. You have the ledger, and the soft brush, and the cold basin, and the particular quality of the wardrobe room at 5 in the morning when the candelabra goes up, and the silk comes out of its wrapping, and the day begins. That is more than a great many people in Paris tonight have. That is enough. The church bell somewhere in the Marais strikes 10. 10 o'clock. The city breathing. You're breathing. The space between waking and sleep growing permeable. The edges of things softening. The thoughts that were thoughts becoming the quieter material that sleep is made of. Tomorrow there will be the wardrobe room. Tomorrow there will be the ledger and the lace and whatever the day produces that the day hasn't told you about yet. Tomorrow the cold floor, the cracked ice in the basin, the walk down the dark stair to the warm work, the hands that know what they're doing. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is only this, the weight of the mattress beneath you, the weight of the blanket over you, the weight of the year in your body, the 12 months of it, the mornings and the evenings and the stitches and the cold water and the roof and the small grey room with the lamp and the 5 minutes that felt like a whole other kind of time entirely. You carry all of it. It's not heavy right now. Right now, it's just the body being tired in the satisfying way, the way that means the day was used correctly, the way that makes sleep not an escape but a completion. Let it come. Let the sounds of Paris grow quieter, or let your listening grow quieter. You can't always tell which is which, and it doesn't matter. The result is the same. The city receding. The room approaching. The particular darkness of the well shaft outside the window becoming the same darkness as behind your eyes, the same darkness as the secondary wardrobe room with the door closed and the linens wrapped, and the 72 garments waiting in their patient darkness for whatever comes next. Centuries will pass. The Paris you know will change past recognition, past any recognition at all. The streets you walk will be paved with something that wasn't invented yet, lit with light from sources no one in 1699 could conceive of. The Seine will be bridged in dozens of places. The Marais will become something else, its hotels particulier converted to apartments and studios, and the particular uses of a city that reinvents its spaces as it reinvents itself. The fashion will change in ways that make the stays and the brocade and the 8 meters of Pointe de France look like a dream about a different kind of body, a different relationship between the clothed self and the bare self. The wells will be filled in. The chimney smoke will come from different fires, but some things won't change. The silk, if it survives, will still carry what it carries. The molecules that went into the weave in 1699 don't know about the centuries. The silk doesn't know it's historical. It knows the body that wore it, and the hands that cared for it, and the cold water, and the muslin cloth, and the way the light hits the silver thread differently, depending on the angle and the time of day. The work of care, the specific, patient, invisible work of taking something that is worn and returning it to something that is ready, that work is still there, in every house where there are things that require tending, in every hand that moves carefully across a surface knowing what it's looking for. Some things don't change. The need for skilled hands doesn't change. The gap between what things appear to be and what they are, and the people who live in that gap know it fully, maintain it. That doesn't change. You're asleep. You don't know it yet, but you are. The thought that was thinking itself has become something else, something that belongs to the other side of the dark, and the room is very quiet, and the well shaft is very dark, and Paris is breathing in the distance with the steady, impersonal breath of a city that doesn't know you're listening. The blanket is enough. The mattress is enough. You are enough. And somewhere in the secondary wardrobe room, 3 floors below you, behind the locked door, wrapped in unbleached linen, tied with ribbon in a colour code that you now know by heart, the gowns are waiting. 72 of them, each one knowing what it knows, patient, dark, ready, the same as they were yesterday. The same as they'll be tomorrow. Good night.